Happy Pride from your favorite internet bookish bisexual. I actually don't know if I'm your favorite bookish bisexual. I suppose you could have another favorite, which is fine. The more bookish bisexuals, the better, I always say. But I love Pride and I love reading. And so what could be a better combination than reading for Pride Month? That being said, I encourage you to read queer books all year long. That's something I do, and it brings great joy and value to my life. And I imagine it will do the same for you as well. And as you saw from the title, I probably put it in the title, this is going to be my second Aardvark Book Club reading vlog. If you don't know what Aardvark is, they are a book subscription service currently only available in Canada and the US. They are still a relatively new subscription service. I joined as a subscriber, as just another paying customer in the summer last year, and I was a subscriber for, I think, four months or so before I reached out to them asking if I could maybe get a discount code for my audience, and they obliged. So I have a discount code for you. Unfortunately, it is just for US subscribers because of the currency exchange rate between the US and Canada. They are a Canadian company, but their warehouses are in the US and they ship from the US. So this is just for new subscribers from the US, but you can get your first book for $4 and free shipping, which is pretty amazing if you use my code PBB. It's an affiliate code, so I make a tiny commission if you do sign up using my code, and you get a book for $4, which is pretty great. This video was not sponsored in any way, shape, or form. I didn't tell anyone at Aardvark that I was making this video. They didn't ask me to make it. They don't know what's happening. This has nothing to do with them except that I'm reading their books for this video. I will, however, disclose to you that since that time where they gave me this code, they started comping my subscriptions. So full disclaimer, the majority of the books on this list were gifted to me and I did not pay for them. So that is your disclaimer. I am being as fully transparent as humanly possible for you. Okay. That being said, all of that out of the way, in this video, I am aiming to read, I'm not sure how many yet, hopefully at least 3, maybe as many as 5 or so, depending on how quickly I get through these, books from my Aardvark subscription that are specifically queer books. Many, many, many of Aardvark's picks have queer representation, which is part of why I love them as a service. They really prioritize queer voices, and I think that is incredible. Their picks in general are very diverse, which I love. Even some of the books that I have not pulled as options for this video that you can see in the background, many of these books also have queer representation. It's just that in these books, as far as I can tell from my research, the queer rep is for secondary characters, not for the protagonists. Okay, I can only hold these up for so long because 14 hardcover books are very heavy, but these are the options that from my research appear to have queer protagonists. So I really hope my research is correct because you know what? It is unnecessarily difficult. I have to put this down. It's unnecessarily difficult to determine what kind of rep books have on the internet. Why is it so hard? I don't know. You'd think that all of the collected knowledge of the universe would exist on the internet. I feel like searching things on the internet is getting less and less reliable. It's like a maze of random information and none of it actually answers your question. Is that just me? I don't know. I just reminisce about the early days of the internet and how much easier it seemed to be to use. Anyways, regardless, these are all the options that I have. So I'm going to quickly go through them. In my last Aardvark reading vlog, I not only went through each book and read the blurb for you and the first line, and then ranked them all by intrigue level. I then went away and read the first chapter of every single book and came back and re-ranked them. And then I started the reading vlog. I enjoyed doing that, but the intro of the last video was probably approaching 40 minutes long, which just seems like a lot. So this time I actually read the first chapter of all of these off camera before filming this intro. So I already have an idea of what my ranking is going to be. So I'm going to go through each and read at least the mini version of the blurb for you. And then I'm going to, as I go, rank them in the order that I determined from reading the first chapter, and then we'll jump into it. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more efficient, but still have a similar vibe, you know? I'm going to use my handy dandy fold out shelf to put them on as I go. So let's just get into this. The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sunyi Dean. I read Book Eaters. Oh, hi, Chewy. I read Book Eaters by this author and adored it. It's on my shelves back here somewhere. So I was very excited to read another one of her books. And the blurb says, when Mercy Chan wakes up on the shores of Hong Kong with no family, no money, and no memories, the only refuge she finds is the infamous ghost-infested slum of Kowloon Walled City. Since then, she has rebuilt her life, working for the local Hey, Chewy just knocked some of my Aardvark books onto the ground. How rude. He's behind my chair, so you can't see him, but he's literally right behind me in the bookshelf. causing a ruckus. Since then, she has rebuilt her life, working for the local triad as a ghost talker and dealing with the angry and bitter spirits who haunt the district. The filthy gutters and cramped alleyways of Kowloon have become her home. But the past Mercy can't remember isn't done with her. An unusually powerful ghost has infested Kowloon's waterways, drowning innocents and threatening the district. It claims to know Mercy, and secrets from her past are best left forgotten. As Mercy is drawn into a deadly cat and mouse game with this malignant spirit, she begins to realize that the monster she fights within these walls may well be one of her own making. And the very first line is, "Late afternoon and the walled city was a fleshy soup." And my reaction to the first chapter was ghost cat. There's a ghost cat. I'm so excited. Also, I believe this is described as fantasy horror, kind of a blend, which makes sense. That was also Book Eater's genre blend. Okay, then we have John of John by Douglas Stewart. This is literary fiction, and this was also one of my May picks, and here's the blurb. Out of money and with little to show for his art school education, John Callum MacLeod takes the ferry back home to the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, pronunciation, ? To find that little has changed except for him. He returns to the windswept croft and the two pillars of his childhood, his father John, a sheep farmer, tweed weaver, and lay preacher in the local Presbyterian church, and his maternal grandmother, Ella, a profanity-loving Glaswegian whose steady warmth helped Cal weather the sudden departure of his mother. Cal privately wonders if any lonely men might be found on the barren hillsides of home, while John is dismayed by his son's long hair, strange clothes, and seeming unwillingness to be saved. But Cal isn't the only one in the Croft house who is keeping secrets. As lambing season turns to shearing season, the threads holding the community together become increasingly frayed, and nothing will remain as it was before. John of John is a singular novel about duty, passion, and the transformative power of the truth. It is a magnificent literary work that cements Douglas Stewart's reputation as one of our greatest novelists working today. And I have never read any Douglas Stewart. He is known for Shuggie Bane, off the top of my head, which won some awards, I believe, again, off the top of my head. My reaction to this first chapter is very strong voice. There is a very strong, clear voice here, and even though not a huge amount happens in that first chapter, I felt immediately like I knew the characters, especially Cal and his father John, and I was immediately drawn into the story, even though, again, not that much happens. So that is John of John. Then we have Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane, and I believe this is just straight up historical fiction. Amid the smoke and turmoil of a divided nation, another fire stirs, one lit by the enslaved. Their rebellions are quiet at times, explosive at others, but never mere resistance. This is outright opposition. When the flames come, justice will rise with them. Inspired by the true stories of the profoundly courageous men and women who dared to fight back, Burn Down Master's House is a singular tour de force of a novel, breathtaking in scope, compassion, righteousness, and timely defiance. For this one, I read the introduction by the author, and it definitely drew me in. It feels like the author did a significant amount of research and had a very clear vision in mind for why he wanted to write this book and why he wanted to bring attention to these really difficult experiences and really take an unflinching look at them. And the introduction itself was incredibly engaging and fascinating, so I'm definitely interested in reading the rest of the novel. And it's going to go here. And again, my ranking is just based on current intrigue as of today, as I film this, the current mood that I'm in, the current place I'm in with the stuff I've been reading lately, what I'm in the mood for right now. I am a major mood reader, so my list probably would change day to day, but this is where I'm at right now. Then we have Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift. This was almost a pick for my 7 books in 7 days sprint that I did for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. It is fantasy, and I believe it's been described as cozy fantasy. The night Lisa Cadigan's brother was murdered by a fairy-made monster known as the Beast, she made him a promise. She would find a way to destroy the immortal creature and avenge his death. For 13 years, she has been hunting fairies and the abominations they created. But in all that time, the one beast she is most desperate to find has never resurfaced. Until she meets Alderic Casimir de Laurent, a melodramatic dandy with a coin purse bigger than his brain. Somehow he has found the monster's lair, and even more surprising, retrieved one of its claws. A claw Lisa needs in order to forge a sword that can kill the beast. Alderic is ill-equipped for a hunt and almost guaranteed to get himself killed, but as the two of them search for the rest of the materials that will be the beast's undoing, Alderic reveals hidden depths, dark secrets that he guards as carefully as Lisa guards hers. Before long, and against Lisa's better judgment, a friendship begins to bloom, one that will either lead to the culmination of Lisa's quest for vengeance or spell doom for them both. All right, next up we have Spoiled Milk by Avery Curran. I believe that this is historical horror. This is another one that I almost picked up for my 7 books in 7 days, and I will read you the blurb. In 1928, Emily Locke's final year at the isolated Briarley School for Girls is derailed when Violet, the school's brightest star and a cunning beauty for whom Emily would do anything, falls to her death on her 18th birthday. Emily and her buttoned-up rival Evelyn are, for once, in agreement. Violet's death was no accident. There's an obvious culprit, the French school mistress with whom Violet was getting a little too close. They need only to prove it. Desperate for answers, Emily and her classmates turn to spiritualism, hoping for a glimpse of wisdom from the great beyond. To their shock, Violet's spirit appears, choosing pious Evelyn as her unlikely medium, and Violet has a warning for them. The danger has just begun. Something deadly is infecting Briarley. It starts with rotten food and curdled milk, but quickly grows more threatening. As the body count rises and the students race to save themselves, Emily must confront the fatal forces poisoning the school. Emily's fight for survival forces her to reevaluate everything she knows about Violet, Evelyn, Briarley, and ultimately herself. And I loved reading the first chapter of this so much that I actually cheated and read the next 2 chapters. So you might be able to guess, I found this incredibly engaging and intriguing, and I immediately wanted to keep going. So this is currently getting my top spot. Okay, then we have Disappoint Me by Nicola Dinan. This is literary fiction, and this is one, I think this might be the first one so far that was included in my original Aardvark video, because I've had this one for a while. And I will read the blurb for you, even though I read it in the first video. 30 years old, with a lifetime of dysphoria and fuckboys rattling around in her head, Max is plagued by a deep dissatisfaction. Shouldn't these be the best years of her life? Why don't they feel that way? After taking a spill down the stairs at a New Year's Eve party, she decides to make some changes. First, a stab at good old-fashioned heteronormativity. Max thinks she's found the answer in Vincent. While his corporate colleagues, trad friends, and Chinese parents never pictured their son dating a trans woman, he cares for Max in a way she'd always dismissed as a foolish fantasy. But he is also carrying baggage of his own. When the fallout of a decades-old entanglement resurfaces, Max must decide what forgiveness really means. Can we be more than our worst mistakes? Is it possible to make peace with the past? Funny, sharp, and poignant, Disappoint Me is a sweeping exploration of love, loss, trans panic, race, millennial angst, and the relationships, familial and romantic, that make us who we are. Now, I'm sure that I will eventually read this and I will love it. My issue with it, and I said this, I'm sure, in the first vlog when I read the first chapter, this first chapter did not pull me in at all. And I reread it because it's been months and it still didn't pull me in at all. And what really gets to me is that this reminds me of one of my least favorite books. And that might be totally unfair. Reading the first chapter, I just found myself thinking about My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, and I hate that book. I have enjoyed other work by Ottessa Moshfegh. I read Death on Her Hands, and I liked that one. I don't know that necessarily this actually would be anything similar to it. I just was getting those vibes from the opening chapter, and I'm struggling. I'm very curious about this author. I almost wish I had bought Bellies instead of this one, because I feel like everything I've heard about Bellies, which is her last novel, or maybe her debut, sounds amazing and sounds right up my alley. Maybe this one is slightly less, or also just maybe I'm not in the best place to read this right now, because just a week ago was the 1-year anniversary of my dad's passing, and it really hit me a lot harder than, I mean, I expected it to be hard, but it hit me way harder than I expected. And I've been pretty down, pretty low, mood-wise. And this first chapter makes me think that this might be a very depressing book, full of, millennial ennui, which is fine. And I can relate to it, but maybe I can relate to it a little too much right now. So for now, this is going on the bottom of my list. I still want to read this. I just have to be in the right place for it. I don't know when that is, but it doesn't feel like it's now, If you have read Disappoint Me, please convince me to read it in the comments. Tell me what it's similar to that maybe I've read that I have enjoyed, unlike My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because I don't know what it is about this first chapter, but I don't find it appealing. Maybe it's the party of it all. I don't really enjoy reading books about people going to parties, and maybe it's the only party in the whole book. I don't know. Anyway. Is This a Cry for Help by Emily Austin. And this one is a newer pick, actually. When did I pick this one? In January, a January pick. Also contemporary or lit fic, just like Disappoint Me, if I didn't mention that. Darcy's life turned out better than she could have ever imagined. She is a librarian at her local branch, while her wife Joy runs a bookbinding service. Between the two of them, there is no more room on their shelves, with their ample book collections, various knickknacks and baubles, and dry bouquets. Rounding out their ideal life are 2 cats and a sun-soaked house by the lake. But when Darcy receives the news that her ex-boyfriend Ben has passed away, she spirals into a pit of guilt and regret, resulting in a mental breakdown and medical leave from the library. When she returns to work, Darcy is met with more unrest as protests result in a call for book bans and a second look at the branch's upcoming DEI programming. Through the support of her colleagues and by examining her past, Darcy discovers her own agency and how to rally the community that stands with her. Is This a Cry for Help is a resounding, delightful novel from the queen of darkly quirky, endearingly flawed heroines. I feel conflicted about this because it's described as delightful. And my understanding, I haven't read any other Emily Austen, but my understanding is that her books tend to be lighter and more humorous from the way people review them. I am a little concerned about the concept being that she had to take a break from work because of grief. Obviously, for obvious reasons, that maybe hits a little too close to home for me right now. And the first chapter was totally fine, but didn't necessarily super draw me in. It was fine. This is kind of similar to Disappoint Me, where I kind of feel like maybe now is not the best time to read this book because it might not put me in the best place. I might not be in the best place mentally to read it. So I think this is going to go on the bottom as well. Again, not to say that I don't want to read these, because again, like I said a million times in the first video, I picked all of these myself, and I picked them all because I wanted to read them, and I do want to read them all. But sometimes some books are not perfect for every moment in someone's life, or at least I find that to be the case for myself. Okay, then we have Girl Dinner by Olive E. Blake, which was one of my November picks. I have had such mixed experiences with Olive E. Blake, so I both am intrigued to see how I react to this and also mildly terrified. So my understanding is that this is horror, sort of a satire and horror. Every member of the house, the most exclusive sorority on campus, and all its alumni are beautiful, high-achieving, and universally respected. After her freshman year she would rather forget, sophomore Nina Carr knows being one of the chosen few accepted into the house is the first step on her path to the brightest possible future. Once she's taken into their fold, the house will surely ease her fears of failure and protect her from those who see a young woman on her own as easy prey. Meanwhile, adjunct professor Dr. Sloane Hartley is struggling to return to work after accepting a demotion to support her partner's new position at the cutthroat university. After 18 months at home with her newborn daughter, Sloane's clothes don't fit right, her girl dad husband isn't as present as he thinks he is, and even the few hours a day she's apart from her child fill her psyche with paralyzing ennui. When invited to be the house's academic liaison, Sloane enviously drinks in the way the alumni seem to have it all, achieving a level of collective perfection that Sloane so desperately craves. As Nina and Sloane each get drawn deeper into the arcane rituals of the sisterhood, they learn that living well comes with bloody costs. And when they are finally invited to the table, they will have to decide just how much they can stomach in the name of solidarity and power. I'm definitely intrigued by this one. Like I said, I'm kind of terrified based on my experiences with Olive E. Blake to date. I really have no idea if I will love or hate this based on what I've read from her so far, but I am curious. I think this one's probably sitting somewhere in the middle, maybe here-ish, based on the first chapter, which I liked the first chapter, but it only introduced us to the professor, and I thought it was pretty funny the way that it handled the dynamic between her and her husband as new parents, but it didn't introduce us to the other protagonist, so it feels a little incomplete still for me. I don't know how I will react to the other protagonist's voice, but we shall see. And the next book is An Arcane Inheritance by Camilla Cole. January 2026, this is dark academia fantasy, as far as I know, and here is the blurb for you. Ellery Morgan is determined to prove that she belongs at Warren University, an Ivy League school whose history is deeply linked to occult rumors and dark secrets. But as she settles into her freshman year, something about the ornate buildings and shadowy paths feels strangely familiar, and with every passing day, that sense of déjà vu grows increasingly sinister. Despite all logic, despite all reason, despite all the rules of reality, Ellery knows one thing to be true. She has been here before, and if she can't convince brooding legacy student Hudson Graves to help her remember a past that seems determined to slip through her fingers as if by some insidious magic, this time she may lose herself for good. My reaction to the first chapter of this was that it felt a little more YA than I had expected. My understanding was that this was adult fantasy, but there was something about the way that it was written and the characterization of the protagonist and who I assume is going to be the love interest that just sort of screamed YA to me. So I think this one is nearer to the bottom of my list currently, probably like here. Oh, these are so heavy. Okay. Salt Crop by Yume Kitase. I read one of her previous books. I'll put the book on the screen because I cannot remember the title of it off the top of my head. I've been racking my brain for a few minutes and I can't remember, and I enjoyed it. So that's why I chose this one in, I believe, November. And this is the blurb. In Earth's not-too-distant future, seas consume coastal cities, highways disintegrate underwater, and mutant fish lurk in pirate-controlled depths. Skipper, a skilled sailor and the youngest of 3 sisters, earns money skimming and reselling plastic from the ocean to care for her ailing grandmother. But then her eldest sister, Nora, goes missing. Nora left home a decade ago in pursuit of a cure for failing crops all over the world. When Skipper and her other sister, Carmen, receive a cryptic plea for help, they must put aside their differences and set out across the sea to find her. As they voyage through a dying world, both beautiful and strange, they learn more about their sister's work and the corporations that want what she discovered. The farther they go, the more uncertain their mission becomes. What dangerous attention did Nora attract? And how well do Skipper and Carmen really know their sister, or each other? Thus begins an epic journey spanning oceans and continents and a wistful rumination on sisterhood, friendship, and ecological disaster. This is another one where I feel like when I eventually get into it and I'm in the mood for it and give it a chance and read it all the way through, I'll enjoy it. But right now, it's not really drawing me. The first chapter was fine. I'm just feeling sort of meh on this one currently. It's just not really drawing me in necessarily. So I think right now this one's going to go on the bottom just because for me it just is not, currently it's just not really evoking any reaction at all. I think I'll enjoy it when I finally get around to it, but I'm just not, it's not drawing me in right now. Okay, then I might have to split up these piles soon because it's getting heavy and I'm scared it's going to break my shelf. My top 5 and my next 5. Okay, then we have Salt Bones by Jennifer Gibbon. This was in my original reading vlog and this one's horror. And the blurb is, Malamar, Veracruz, has never left the dust-choked town of El Valle. Here, Mal has done her best to build a good life. She's raised 2 children, worked hard, and tried to forget the painful, unexplained disappearance of her sister Elena. But when another girl goes missing, Mal plunges into a fresh yet familiar nightmare. As a desperate Mal hunts for answers, her search becomes increasingly tangled with inscrutable visions from a horse-headed woman, a legend locals call La Siguanaba, whom Mal feels compelled to follow. Mal's perspective is joined by the voices of her 2 daughters, and the 3 of them must work to uncover the truth about the missing girls in their community before it's too late. Combining the elements of Latina and indigenous culture, family drama, mystery, horror, and magical realism in a spellbinding mix, Saltbones explores the long shadows cast by environmental catastrophe, family secrets, and the unrelenting bond between mothers and daughters. And I think if I remember correctly, this one was closer to the bottom for intrigue for me in my first vlog. I think it's higher up for me this time. I'm just more interested in the concept. I'm more in the mood for it, I guess. So I think this one's gonna go here, roughly in the middle, like here. And I reread that first chapter as well. And my reaction to the first chapter was, again, sort of similar, where the prologue really drew me in and was very fast-paced and intense and full of tension. And then the first chapter that came after that sort of cut the tension a bit for me, and I wasn't quite as drawn in by it, but overall I'm more interested in it this time. Okay, then I have Moderation by Elaine Castillo, and this one is one that I picked up because I read their nonfiction work, How to Read Now, and I adored it and gave it 5 stars, so it made me curious about her fiction. And I will be totally honest that the premise of this did not initially draw me in when I wasn't familiar with the author's work, and I didn't choose it the month that it was one of the main picks for Aardvark. Girly Del Mondo works a day job at a social media moderation center, flagging and removing the very worst of what makes it onto the internet. She's good at it too, dispassionate, unflinching. She's learned the value of cauterizing her emotions and tackling tasks with procedural aplomb, especially when any success must be stacked against the harrowing churn of global crisis beyond her control. When the company offers her a big pay raise and an office to start moderating its new venture, virtual reality theme parks, stunning simulations of civilizations long since dead, Girly takes the job. Getting paid to spend her days wandering the crowds of medieval jousts or exploring romantic left bank Paris seems too good to be true. Sure, she signed up for having to deal with the sordidness of pretty much any virtual space and its users, but as she begins to explore the intricate worlds she moderates, she notices 2 deeply troubling things. There might be something much darker built into the very code of this company, and that William, technically her new boss, a man whose barriers are as mighty as her own, might just be that long-forgotten thing, Girly's type. And I just might not be in the right place to read this right now. It seems like the content that's being moderated is really, really dark, and I'm not sure I can handle that at the moment. So this one is going near the bottom, unfortunately for now. I just don't think I'm in the right place to read it, to be totally honest. Okay, we're down to the last 2. So we have Nowhere Burning by Catriona Ward. I have read a couple of Catriona Ward's books and really enjoyed them. So I immediately chose this one when it was an option in, what month? March. Riley and her brother Oliver set off in the pitch-black night, fleeing their troubled home. They are heading for nowhere, an abandoned ranch, once the playground of its former eccentric movie star owner, now a haven for runaways. What awaits could be the freedom they crave, but this mysterious clan guards dark secrets, and the scorched grounds hold the ghosts of the past. Riley quickly realizes that while she and Oliver may have escaped the devil they knew, something darker lurks in the burnt shell of nowhere. Something which asks a terrible price for sanctuary. This is horror, I believe. This one definitely intrigued me as well. Probably very similar range as Saltbones. For ease of piles, I'm going to put it here at the top of this pile because they're basically equivalent for me. And then the last book that, as far as I could tell from my research, featured a queer protagonist from my Aardvark collection was Whoever You Are, Honey by Olivia Gatwood, which I included in my first video. I think this was one of my picks my very second month, July. On the Santa Cruz waterfront, every house is a flawless glass monolith, except for one. In a dilapidated bungalow, Mitty and her elderly roommate Bethel are an oddball pair who represent the last vestiges of a free-spirited town taken over by the tech elite. But their lives are about to be forever changed when a new couple, Sebastian and Lena, move in next door. Sebastian is a renowned tech founder and Lena is his spellbindingly perfect girlfriend. But Lena has secrets. She feels uneasy about her oddly spotty memory and is growing increasingly wary of the way Sebastian controls their relationship. Mitty is also hiding something, and the way Lena appears to float through her luxurious life draws Mitty inexorably into her orbit. As the two women begin to form a close friendship, they are finally forced to face their pasts and the urgent truths that could change everything. For me, this one's definitely intriguing. Again, I reread the first chapter because it had been several months, and it again drew me in right away. I really liked the atmosphere of it. It just feels ominous in a way that I enjoy. So I think for me, this one is sitting right about here, probably. Actually, I think it's just above Girl Dinner. Oh my God, these are so heavy. Okay, like this. So now they are in order of current, most intriguing to least intriguing based on my mood today, how I'm feeling right this very moment. I'm keeping the door open for my mood reading self, and I'm going to be doing this project over a bit of a longer period, hopefully, so that I can maybe include a few more books in this video. But as you can see, my number one most intriguing book is Spoiled Milk. So I think I'm going to start with this one. I am very intrigued by the creepy boarding school vibes of this one. I also love this cover so much. It is impeccable. It's so good. So I'm going to go start, well, like I said, I cheated a little bit. I got carried away and I read the first couple chapters. So I'm going to go keep reading this. And when I get to the halfway point, I'll be back to let you know how it's going and what I think. But I am very intrigued. I really enjoyed the first couple chapters and I'm excited to dive in. It was very hard to pause and to wait until I film this intro. So I'm going to go start Spoiled Milk. I hope you're excited for this Pride Aardvark reading vlog, and let's get into it. I'm halfway through Spoiled Milk and I'm really enjoying this so far. I really love how this is examining the complexity of female friendships, especially in the coming of age years, those years in between girlhood and womanhood. These girls are on the cusp of 18 and just about in their final year at boarding school. And you can really feel that in so many ways they are about to be women, but they're still girls. And I just think it's such an interesting time period to write books about. Coming of age is so broad and can really have quite a large age range, but I think there's something about being, 17, about to turn 18. And in this time period, this is set in the 20s, late 20s, ages had a little bit of a different connotation, but even still, this is their final year at boarding school, like their final year of high school. And they are in some ways being treated like girls, like kids, because they're still at the same school with younger girls. And while the mistresses give them a little bit more freedom and they have some privileges that the younger girls don't have, they're still, strict rules they must follow. There are bells for every step of their routine that they have to follow. They still don't have the kind of freedom that an adult would have, but they are just on the edge of reaching that adulthood. And there are a few moments in this that really acknowledge that, especially in their grief, which, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm pretty sure the blurb talks about how Violet dies. She dies in the first chapter, so it's not a spoiler. It's interesting how the adults in the situation, the staff at the school, the mistresses, the teachers, they really struggle to figure out how to support the girls through their loss because they're not quite adults, but they're also not little girls anymore. And so they sort of awkwardly don't acknowledge their grief, which is just a larger issue in general and something that a lot of people do, no matter what your age, where people just don't know what to say, so they don't say anything. But it's really interesting to see all the many ways that they are just on the edge of becoming adults. And especially when it comes to their sexuality and sexual awakenings and relationships, because not only is our protagonist so far very heavily coded to be sapphic, unclear if she has any interest in boys because this is a girls' boarding school and there are no boys to be seen, so we have no comparison. But she certainly seems to have romantic feelings towards at least one girl. And she also seems to have some pretty intense internalized homophobia and externalized homophobia, which does make sense for the time period, but a warning if you're going into reading this, there's definitely homophobia going on, and homophobia coming from the protagonist who we're following. And this is in first person, so you're really in her head. I wouldn't say it's too terrible or too constant, but it's definitely an aspect of her character that she has not come to terms with her sapphic feelings. And we also have two other girls within this core group who are very clearly in a relationship, and they're really not even trying to hide it that much, which is surprising to me. I wonder how realistic that would be if their forms of affection would have been seen as just normal affection between friends, or if the idea is that they just feel comfortable around the other girls in their class and they don't think that anyone would rat them out, or if it's exaggerated for effect to make sure that the reader picks up on it. But either way, I'm really enjoying both the coming of age aspect of it and also the trying to figure out our protagonist wrestling with her own sexuality, and I really hope she makes progress. I see an eventuality where she breaks through because she's having interactions with a particular character that I could see turning into something romantic, and I would love to see her figure that out for herself, but who knows, because simultaneously we have the fact that Violet died a sudden and shocking death in the first chapter, and things are happening. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but things are happening. Things feel like they're escalating. It feels like things are not right at Briarly. And I don't know how likely the girls are to have enough time to really work through these feelings and to make progress there, because they're just trying to solve the mystery and also survive. So we'll see about that. But it's fascinating. I'm enjoying the writing style. It's, for the most part, pretty morose is maybe the wrong word, serious, but there are definitely moments of humor that I'm really enjoying. I really like the dynamic between the girls. I think they have a really interesting dynamic and it's quite complicated. I feel like I can really feel the history between them. They have been at school together since they were 12 and they have seen each other through so much. And even the girls who haven't been as close, they still know so much about each other, right? Like they've lived in the same room for all this time and go to every class together. And so there's just this bond, almost like sisters, that is really interesting to see. I also really love the horror elements. It's definitely not clear yet what the cause is and whether there is something truly otherworldly happening, or if there are more natural, more scientifically based causes for what's going on. It definitely feels like there might be a supernatural element, which is fun. And just generally the atmosphere is pretty heavy and tense, and I just find myself not wanting to put the book down at all. I just want to keep reading till the end because I want to know what happened. I want all the mysteries to be solved. I want the tension to be resolved. It's going very well. I'm really enjoying this so far. So that is my halfway update for Spoiled Milk. Will I do a spoiler section? I think I'm going to save talking about spoilers till the end of the book because there are a couple things I could maybe comment on, but I think that I'll be able to speak a little bit more comprehensively about those facets and the entire book, obviously, once I finished it. So I think I'll save spoilers for the end. But I'm really enjoying this. I'm hoping it can stick the landing. So I'm gonna go find out. I might stay up very late tonight to find out because I'm not sure I can go to sleep without knowing the answers to all my questions. I definitely won't be updating you tonight though, because if I do finish it tonight, it's going to be very late. So I'll see you tomorrow, but I'm having a good time. Okay, bye. I finished Spoiled Milk and wow, I really liked this. I liked this a lot. I might repeat myself a bit. Future me will hopefully be able to cut out the parts where I repeat myself from the halfway update if I do, but I really, really enjoyed this. And it's interesting because I really try to avoid looking at any reviews while I'm actually reading the book and until I've taken some time to write out some notes and sort of formalize my thoughts and how I want to rate the book, because I just don't want to be influenced by other people's opinions. But once I have done all those things, I do like to take a look at a few reviews, usually a couple low reviews, a couple mid reviews, and a couple high reviews, just to see what people are saying and how people are reacting. And it was so interesting to me to read the negative reviews on this because I just don't agree. And that's fine. That's what reading is. You know, we all have different experiences of books. I don't think that this was an absolutely perfect book. It is a debut, and I think that there are places where you could maybe tell it was a debut, but I really, really enjoyed it, and I thought it was very interesting, and I'm kind of surprised by some of those negative reviews, but regardless, I'm not reacting to those. I will tell you what I think. So I'll start with my non-spoilery thoughts for those of you who are not sure yet if you want to read this to try to kind of help you determine if this might be for you, and then I'll get into spoilers. So like I told you at the beginning, the setup is that we have a group of girls in their last year at a boarding school and one of them dies, and then things kind of escalate from there. It's definitely playing on the classic Gothic haunted house, but in this case, obviously a boarding school. And I really liked the school as a setting. I felt that the school really had its own weight and presence in the story. It was very atmospheric, but also the school was explained enough. We got enough context for the history of the school, and we got enough descriptions of what the school looked like and the layout and things to really feel, I felt anyway, a strong sense of place within the school, and also the role that the school plays in this horror, why it's happening here and nowhere else. The school is symbolic in many ways and ties into some of the greater themes that are being explored on multiple levels as well, because I do feel that there is something to be said about setting this in the 20s in a boarding school that is sort of one of the last lingering establishments of a previous age, of an imperialist age that is starting to crumble, that is starting to lose its hold on the country and on the world. And these girls are being indoctrinated, educated, but indoctrinated into a certain worldview, and they're being taught to be, or raised to be, valuable members of society, which for women in the 20s and in this particular, this style of old school boarding school is to either be good workers in the very few professions that women were allowed to have at the time, or to make good wives and mothers. That is very much the purpose of the school. And I just find it very interesting that this institution feels very uninterested in the evolution of women's roles in society, the evolution of society in general, and England's place in society at large. There's something to be said for how the school and the teachers and the matrons are trying to direct the girls down a very specific path. And as you know, because I picked it up for this video, our protagonist is queer. She is sapphic. It's not specified, I don't think, at any point if what identity these girls are. They do talk about lesbians at one point because they were reading about lesbians in the paper, but we don't know for sure, in part because there are basically 0 men in this entire book. There is the father of the initial character who dies, who comes to the funeral, and there is the postman who shows up at one point but doesn't enter the grounds of the school, and otherwise there are no men. So we really don't know how they feel about boys or men in general, which is kind of nice. It's just a story exclusively and explicitly about women and girls. But these girls are sapphic, and presumably at least a few of them are lesbians who have very little interest in pursuing traditional marriage with a man and being a wife and mother. I think this novel is really trying to raise questions about who these institutions are for, what they're designed to do, and who they are serving. Are they actually serving the girls who are being sent to these schools, or are they serving someone else's needs or interests, especially for the girls here who are queer? Is this institution set up in such a way that their choice to do something else with their life would be seen as a failure of the institution? And this school has been their home since they were 12 years old. And so there's this really interesting combination of the school being this ominous presence and a bit of an indoctrinating force for them that is not always positive or not always safe, especially as the book continues, but it also has been their home. And for many of these girls, it has been a happier and safer home, at least up until recent events, than their actual home with their family or their parents. Several of the girls experienced abuse at home. So there is that factor of the push and pull of feeling that this is home and this is safety, and really struggling with adapting to the changes as the school becomes hostile and an unsafe place to stay, where they are struggling with weighing the pros and cons of going home where they have never felt safe and leaving the place that has become their home, even as their home starts to become actively dangerous to their continued survival. The school has provided safety and stability, but it also is a very strict controlling environment, and again, a very indoctrinating force with a very specific agenda for who they are meant to be and what they are meant to do when they leave its walls. So much of what the school is doing is trying to create good wives and mothers, productive members of society, and it's very much more interested in what they have to provide to society, the value that they hold, rather than who they actually are and what they're really interested in. We know for sure that at least our protagonist and 5 other characters are sapphic in one way or another. And I really loved how this book examined and explored queerness, with our protagonist especially, who is not aware that she is queer at the beginning of the book, and she discovers it as the book continues and realizes that her feelings for her best friend were maybe not as simple as she thought. And there's just a lot of working through a huge amount of internalized homophobia, but also, or specifically internalized lesbophobia in this case, and just all of that self-discovery and first love and reckoning with desire and your identity and moving through the shame and the unease and the just confusion of coming to that realization that I think a lot of young queer girls go through, and maybe now less so because there's so much more information and there's so much more access to information and understanding of different types of identities that can exist and different experiences. But, you know, the more you go back in time and in the 20s, and I really don't know what kind of exposure they would have had at the time to queerness, but these girls are all sort of in a different place in their self-discovery. And for our protagonist, I would say she's probably the most behind. And I found it really interesting to watch her go through those stages and grow and change and rage about it because she's angry about it a lot of the time. I think one of the reasons why I loved Emily, our protagonist, so much is that she is so angry. This is definitely a female rage book, if ever I've seen one. I also just think that she, you know, she's working through her feelings, and her go-to when she feels embarrassed or confused or vulnerable or any strong feeling, she reverts to anger. She goes to anger first. And I just find it really funny. Like, I saw some reviews where people found Emily to be the most unlikable character out of a cast of unlikable characters. Personally, for me, I found all the characters likable in at least one way or another. I thought they were all really interesting, and I actually found most of them very, very endearing. I think it's important to remember that they are all 17, on the cusp of 18. I think Marion is the only one of the friends who has already turned 18. You know, they're young, and they've been living cloistered at a girls' boarding school since they were 12, surrounded by the same, you know, 6, 7 girls their age, sharing a room, and in some ways being quite infantilized and protected and sheltered from the outside world, intentionally somewhat, to control their values and their beliefs and their understanding of the choices they can make when they leave and what they should do with their life. And so they are maybe a young 17 or a young 18, but I just think, like, they're girls, they're teenagers, and it comes up again and again. So much of a through line here is about coming of age and of being on that cusp of girlhood and womanhood and being completely unequipped to handle all the more supernatural, horrifying things that are happening because they're children, they're teenagers, they don't know what they're doing. Even an adult would be completely unequipped for everything that happens. But for me personally, finding characters unlikable is not enough for me to dislike an entire book if I find them interesting. And in this book, not only did I not find any of the characters particularly unlikable, again, I found the more aggressive, adversarial, angry characters, I would say Emily, Evelyn, Violet, I found them entertaining. They're kind of funny. And it's clearly meant to be funny. There are so many moments of little quips and comebacks at each other. This is in some ways just how they have grown to interact with each other. They have this very intertwined, kind of toxic, very weirdly codependent friendships and romantic relationships and almost sisterly type relationships with different girls within the group because they have spent so much time together day in, day out for so many years with no one else to talk to. And they get annoyed at each other, as any girl would. I mean, even just going to a camp, an overnight camp for a few weeks or a month around this age, you get close fast, but you also get so irritated with each other. And I think it was realistic. I also just think it's okay for characters to be unlikable because that's interesting and people are unlikable sometimes. I find it especially funny when people call out that the protagonist is the most unlikable of any other character, because if you're in the head of the protagonist, you're gonna get access to all of their inner thoughts, some of which are not going to be totally charitable. If the author's willing to go there. So therefore, by design, you're getting more access to their thoughts. I don't know. I just find it funny sometimes when people say the main character was more unlikable. I wish we'd followed someone else. And I'm like, well, if you followed someone else and you got to see what they were thinking all the time, maybe you would also find them unlikable, because there's lots of things that they're probably thinking that they're not saying out loud. And for Emily, again, a lot of the things that I think people found unlikable about her were her inner thoughts that she did not always say out loud, because a lot of us have uncharitable thoughts or judgmental thoughts or mean thoughts or whatever that we don't say out loud because that that's an inside thought, not an outside thought. So anyway, I just find it funny. I didn't actually find them unlikable, and I found her anger at the changes she's experiencing and her anger at realizing that she's actually having crushes on girls, and be angry that she now has to deal with this complexity, and like sort of her reaction then gets all mixed up where she'll get angry at the object of her affection, and then she'll be mad at her and also kind of want to kiss her at the same time, and then she's confused, and then she's even more mad. I just think it's really kind of cute and funny. And I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I liked Emily. I liked all the characters. I found them very endearing. I was really attached to all of them. I really loved them all. I think Alice and Dot were really endearing. Sophie, I loved a lot. Violet dies in the first chapter, but I found her really fascinating. Evelyn, Emily, Marion, they were all very distinct. They all had their own personality, and I found it really interesting to see how they all interacted with each other and their group dynamic. Their friendship was really very fascinating to watch, and I was sad every time anything bad happened to any of them because I was very attached to them very quickly. And again, so many of these characters are queer, and that queerness is really a through line through the entire book. It is tied so much to some of the broader themes about conformity and self-determination and choosing your path and having the freedom to choose a different path than the one that has been sent down through the annals of history and the expectations of the old guard, but maybe doing something a little more modern now that it's almost 1930. I think it's especially interesting to see how their queerness manifests itself and how they think about it and interact with each other around those ideas and communicate their queerness, because they are so isolated from larger culture. So it almost doesn't matter on some level what the greater queer culture would have been at the time in the late 20s, because they're not exposed to it. They are so isolated. They may occasionally get the papers, they can occasionally go home and visit and maybe see a couple other people. They can occasionally go into town, but they are incredibly isolated. So regardless of what kind of queer culture might exist at the time, they are, again, living in this sort of snow globe, a snapshot of the past in this old grand estate that has been turned into this boarding school that is, again, very much built upon these imperialist and very traditional values. And the novel feels very much interested in that tension between individuality and forging your own path and institutional structure and expectations. The girls are trying to figure out who they are actively. They are coming of age and having their first loves and really navigating all of this and determining who they are and what they want from their lives. But the institution has a very clear idea. The institution's already decided who they are and who they will become. And there is a really intense, palpable tension between those two things that is pulled so taut that it breaks in this book. I don't want to belabor the point too much, especially for those who haven't read it, but I think it's really interesting the way that Avery Curran keeps tying back to the foundation, the seed of this estate that then turned into the boarding school, and the fact that it was built on colonization and greed and exploitation. You can feel the weight of the history and the inheritance while reading it. And I think that that is part of what makes this really great, in my opinion, really great Gothic horror, because the setting has so much history and weight, and the setting is so important to the horror that is happening, but also to all of the themes that are being explored. Everything is really tied together, from family expectations, social expectations, gendered expectations, and national expectations, and the question of whether the new generation, your youth, have a responsibility to carry those values forward, or if they're allowed to forge their own path, make their own choices for their lives, and evolve and grow and change. I just think Emily is such a fascinating character as our protagonist. Her cruelty and her selfishness and her sharp wit are stacked right alongside her fear and her vulnerability and her unhealthy attachment to the girls around her and to the school. She feels incredibly real and messy and complicated and layered, and I think maybe she feels unlikable because we're privy to her most uncharitable, deepest, darkest thoughts. And, I think most of us would probably be less likable if people had access to our inner thoughts. Again, some thoughts stay inside thoughts because they're not nice. And if you have nothing nice to say, as the old adage goes, so many of the girls are so fascinating. I think Evelyn also is very angry, and her anger is a different kind of anger to Emily's. Her anger is so much born from so many years of isolation and exclusion, an even deeper isolation than the other girls have experienced, and an exclusion that the other girls haven't had as sort of the scapegoat of their year. And her anger is really interesting to unpack as the book continues and you get to know her better. I think Violet is such a fascinating character, even though she's barely on the page, because her charisma is huge, but it also coexists with this really intense manipulative streak and this cruelty that is, again, kind of rubbed off on Emily, her best friend. And henchman, her henchwoman, her right-hand woman. I think one of the ways that I read the metaphorical or symbolic meaning of the horrific events of this book is that it is the horror of change, the horror that the old guard, the institution, feels at seeing their values and traditions be corrupted by the youth. You know, the girls are growing up, society is changing, and the institution is deeply invested in preserving those traditional older values and is absolutely willing to go to great lengths to prevent this change that they see as completely unacceptable, if not, heretical or ultimately destructive. And I find it really interesting that Violet turns 18 and immediately dies and kicks off the novel, because it does feel, again, symbolic that Violet is this symbol of change, of self-determination, of free will. She's very hard-headed and confident, and she does what she wants, and she is flouting her queerness, and she seems unconcerned with what people will think of her or what will happen. And I think there is, it doesn't feel like the timing is accidental. It feels like the institution knows it's losing hold of these girls, and that Violet has been able to corrupt her year through her charisma. And if she's allowed out into the world, how many others will she corrupt? And I kind of love that idea of an 18-year-old lesbian just being like the most charismatic, beautiful, interesting woman, that she's going to go out in the world and just like the next thing you know, everyone is going to be a lesbian. And then what will we do? Like, just, it's funny to me. Like, obviously homophobia is not funny, but I just think it's entertaining to me, the whole mindset of we can't allow queer people to just be themselves, because then they'll encourage other people to be queer because they're having so much fun and they're so hot and sexy, I guess. I don't know. I just find it kind of funny. I feel like if you're afraid of people being turned queer just because there are hot, sexy, interesting queer people out and about, then maybe the people who were going to be influenced were already a little queer to begin with, Just a thought. I think the last thing I'll say without spoilers, because I feel like I've been talking for much longer than I planned, is that some reviews I saw were upset that this book didn't really give clear answers for why and how everything was happening. And I will say that I've certainly read a couple books where I wished that we got a few more answers. Here, I felt like we kind of got the answers. No, we didn't get the mechanics. No, we didn't maybe get everything told to us super explicitly in the way that maybe people were hoping for, but I feel like there were more than enough breadcrumbs left throughout the book to really indicate to you sort of what the source of this evil is and why it might be happening now and to these specific girls. And for me, I didn't come away feeling like I didn't get enough answers or feeling unsatisfied by it. I think there's also an element for me, maybe just because I read so many different genres. For me, I often think of something like sci-fi being a genre where I'm much more expecting to get answers. I'm expecting whatever's happening to be explained, usually. There are some exceptions. I'm thinking of Jeff Vandermeer, he usually doesn't explain. But most sci-fi, I feel like you get answers for how everything works. Whereas in horror, I often don't expect an answer. A lot of horror, there are no answers. It's just something is evil and bad things are happening. And there might be themes that are being explored, and you might know kind of what the author is trying to get at with the story and symbolically why it's happening, but you might not have any actual in-world answers for why all this horrifying stuff is happening, or why someone is evil, or why a place is evil. And so I'm kind of confused by expecting those answers, to be totally honest, because I feel like a lot of the horror I read does not explain how it's happening. It might explain why, again, in a thematic sense, but does it explain how? Usually not, in my experience. So I would just say in general, if you are thinking about reading this, if you are someone who wants all the answers, if you want something that is very clearly explained, you're not going to enjoy this, because this does not do that at all. But if you're okay with something that's a little bit more metaphorical and symbolic and allows you to infer through its many, many hints throughout and the ways that it is telling the story why this is happening, and if you're not as attached to the, intricate mechanics of how it's happening, I think you might have a lot more fun with it, like I did. And I thought it was a lot of fun. Haunted house vibes, mysterious deaths, possession, rot and decay, seances and spirits, and many unexplained phenomena, and some gore and sort of body horror stuff to top it off. I thought it was great fun. But I think that's it for non-spoilery thoughts for Spoiled Milk. I will just say that for me, this felt very much also like a metaphor for not being able to return home, not being able to return back to the version of home that felt simple and innocent and safe, either just because you've come of age, you've become an adult, and you no longer can see your home through the same eyes. You can't go back there again because you are now changed. But on a deeper level as a queer person, especially if you come out to your family, for example, and they're not accepting and loving of you, the place that was once your safe haven is no longer a safe place for you. And you can never go back to the version of yourself and the version of your family or your home where you were accepted and safe there. And that is because that safety actually never really existed, at least not in an unconditional way. It was always conditional and a partial safety based on you performing your life in a particular way to particular standards. And I think that's so much of what this book is doing. And I think that's such an important idea, that's such an important concept to be writing literature about, because so many queer people go through that and lose their safe place, lose their home, and lose their family or their friends when they come out to them, when they try to live authentically, because they're no longer following this strict path that others want them to live. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking, and no one should go through that. And it is horrifying and it is horrible to live through. And I just think that this book does a really beautiful job of exploring those ideas while also making this a fun, engaging, really intense and immersive horror novel that really keeps you guessing and invested all the way through. So those are my non-spoilery thoughts. Now let's talk about spoilers, starting now. The spoilers for the whole book, so don't watch these if you're interested in reading this and you want to be surprised. Spoilers starting now. So I'm just referring to my notes because I don't want to forget anything. Again, the house is very much the horror here. Nothing is explained, but it's very clear through the whole book that the house itself is corrupted. The house itself has maybe always been corrupted. And we get indications all the way through, and especially at the end, that perhaps this evil has been under the house, under the estate, festering and rotting this whole time. And it finally has reached a boiling point, because even Violet points out that her father, while never her favorite person, became worse at the school. Every time he visited the school, his hunger was amplified and he became more inappropriate and more likely to sexually harass or assault Violet or the other girls. And it seems like this is something that has been festering for a long time. And we learn about the history of the school. And again, it's built on this colonial wealth. It's built on the exploitation of slaves. It is built on blood and suffering. And the family lost control of the estate. They lost their wealth when they could no longer have slaves. And I think it was the heir gambled away the last of their money because, again, greed. The house, the boarding school, is haunted by this legacy of imperialism, of empire, of this corrupting greed. And there is this aspect of, at some point, it is just rotten to its core. This system is rotten to its core, and it just has to be burned to the ground, which they literally do because they can't think of any other way to contain the rot that has started to spread out from the school in all directions. And sometimes that is just how it is. Something is so rotten to its core, it is built on so much pain and suffering that it just has to be torn down. And I think what's really interesting is that the supernatural evil, the sort of entity, which isn't even really an entity, it just feels like the house itself. The energy of the house is this corrupting force, that it is built again on corruption, but that corruption leaks out and seeps into everything. And as the book continues, it causes the remaining matrons and the other few students who are there at the school to basically become possessed by the house, to become almost zombies, where their existing cruelty, their existing attachment to or allegiance to imperialism are being amplified so much that there's nothing else left. And the house itself seems to encourage hunger in everyone. First, more of a metaphorical hunger, and again, in Violet's father being very lustful and abusive of his daughter in that way, and again, harassing, at the very least, the other girls, that there is this hunger, both metaphorical and then eventually a literal hunger, where the remaining teachers and students start to literally attack and cannibalize A few of the remaining girls, Alice and Marion, are both essentially eaten by the remaining symbols of the institution. It's hunger and its many forms. The hunger that society has to consume girls and women for its own gain, for its own needs, the hunger of imperialism, of colonialism, to eat up all resources, all wealth, no matter who you harm in the process. It doesn't matter how many workers or slaves are used up by the system, because the greed is so great, the hunger is so great. And it's sort of all tied back to that really basic, almost biblical sin of hunger and greed and gluttony on multiple levels. And I think the way that the teachers change especially really was the strongest indicator to me that this was so much a haunting of literal imperialism, because the teachers become obsessed with duty and loyalty, and they start teaching as if they are still living in the great imperialist age, and the gramophone starts playing patriotic songs, and they become completely unable to view the students, the girls, as individuals, and they seem completely brainwashed by these ideas that they already held on some level, but they've now lost the part of themselves that tempered it and their humanity. The school seems trapped in its allegiance to the British Empire, and also trapped in the past, trapped in amber, a nostalgia for a past time, a past life, and a social order that was built on this strict hierarchy and control. And like I mentioned in the non-spoiler section, it really does feel like the institution has realized with this crop of girls, this class with multiple queer women who are engaging in sapphic relationships within its walls, that it's realizing that it's losing its grip, it's losing its control of these girls, that they're going to go out into the world and they're not going to do what the institution was built to do. And it feels like a final rage-filled cry of despair at the loss of what was, and this huge terrified resistance to change and evolution of society in general, and fear of losing control of these girls and them going out into the world and corrupting it with their, dangerous lesbian tendencies. The school is lashing out against change, and Violet is its first target because she represents its failure. She embodies a future that this institution cannot survive. And I really appreciate the complexity, because while I do think that the school, it's very obvious through the way the book was written that the school was built on evil and built from evil, and always had that core that could never be fully snuffed out. And again, sort of the idea that they had to burn it all down and start over. But at the same time, the school did provide a safe haven for these girls. It did provide safety and friendship and comfort and a place for them to grow and learn themselves, and a place that was maybe more accepting, at least for a while, of their individuality and who they are than their homes and their parents. And so it becomes more complicated than just this is 100% outright evil in every single way, and every moment that we spent here was terrible, and now we're burning it down, because then there would be no sense of loss. Whereas for them, there is such a huge sense of loss, not only because they've lost some of their friends, many of their friends, through this ordeal, and they've watched their friends die, but also because both Evelyn and Emily are survivors at the end, have such fond memories of the school and felt safer and more at home at the school than they did with their own families. And to lose that feels like they're losing the last place where they belong, even though they know that it's no longer safe for them. And I think, again, that ties so much to that idea of being a queer person, coming out to your family, them not accepting you, and suddenly realizing that the only place where you felt like you belonged, you no longer belong. And it's so painful to leave or to cut yourself off from that, to protect yourself, to save yourself, even though you know that it would be dangerous to stay and it's no longer a safe, accepting place for you. It still hurts to lose that, even again, if that love and that support and that safety was always conditional on you playing a particular part or being a particular kind of person. The realization that a place can both nurture you and fail you on such a profound level. And it is, in so many ways, a queer coming of age story, and finally cutting ties to your past so that you can move forward and build your own life beyond the institution that shaped you. I will say that also that I tried to not even indicate who our protagonist had a romantic relationship with in the non-spoiler section, because I don't know, I felt like it would be a spoiler to talk about Evelyn and Emily's relationship. I do find their relationship really interesting. I think the development is really fascinating. I do think that they're, both of them, sort of being angry at being attracted to each other, and both of them being angry because their first choice was Violet, and now Violet is gone, and they were both in love with Violet, and now Violet's no longer an option, and they're realizing that they actually have feelings for each other, and they're both so angry about it. And I just found that really kind of funny to read. Like, they're both they hate each other. This is very much enemies to lovers, except they're still kind of enemies by the end, even though they are also lovers. I just think it's like, so many times when I hear a book described as enemies to lovers and I read it, I'm like, I don't know, they didn't really seem like enemies. Here they are enemies. Enemies. They hate each other. And it was kind of refreshing. And again, maybe that's why people think that they're so unlikable and they didn't enjoy that dynamic. And I didn't always enjoy it. There were definitely moments, especially their one intimate encounter on page felt very jarring because, again, it's not very tender. They hate each other. And you can tell. And it was not necessarily the most pleasant to read, but it maybe felt realistic for this kind of dynamic. I don't know. I've never had an enemies to lovers arc in real life, so I couldn't tell you. But I thought it was refreshing because it seemed like it was actually going for it instead of pulling punches like a lot of enemies to lovers do. And I was happy that they ended up together, even if their relationship is pretty, has its toxic qualities. And if they're both incredibly traumatized, which would make sense considering what they went through, I am glad that they at least have each other and have stayed together instead of going in their own separate ways and being completely in isolation, having to deal with the trauma of what they went through, that they still have each other to support. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to stop talking. I feel like I just talked for so long. Oh my God. I meant to talk for maybe 15 minutes and I talked for an hour. That's Spoiled Milk. Those were my spoilery thoughts. Even though I think that there were a couple moments here and there where I kind of felt the debut-ness of it all. Overall, I thought this was a really, really impressive debut, and I just had a lot of fun with it. I thought it was so interesting. All the themes were really fascinating to me, right up my alley. I loved the characters. I thought they were so interesting. I found it really propulsive and engaging and intense, and there were some scary moments, some really sort of haunting, unsettling moments, and I just think it all came together in a way that I really appreciated, and I think I'm going to give this 5 stars. Not a completely perfect book, but very much up my alley. So interesting. And I cannot wait to read more of what Avery Curran has up her sleeves. I hope she has many more books she's going to write because I would love to read them. I really had a lot of fun with this. I think a lot of people might bounce off of this depending on your taste. But if you have similar taste to me and if you listen to this whole review and it sounds up your alley, I would check it out because I thought this was really, really interesting and a very entertaining read. So yeah. Anyway, I talked about Spoiled Milk for way longer than I planned to. I finished Spoiled Milk yesterday or the day before. I can't remember. I've had a busy couple days with life things. So I finished that a couple days ago, which is in part why I was relying so much on my notes because I didn't want to forget anything. And when I finished it, I decided to pick up my next book so I could get started. And I chose The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sunyi Dean. and I chose The Girl with a Thousand Faces. So I am now halfway through this. I really struggled to stop at the halfway point. I am also finding this very immersive and engaging. I'm really enjoying it. It is so interesting. I loved The Book Eaters, so I was expecting to like this, and I am really enjoying it. The concept of this, the premise here, is so fascinating to me. I love the way that the ghosts are being written. I love the Chinese folklore that is being interwoven through everything. I love this sort of alternate history of ghosts existing amongst people and how that changes the dynamics in Hong Kong, this remote island that we go to at one point, and this one specific neighborhood where a lot of ghosts converge. And I think, using ghosts as an indicator of trauma and the casualties of war and the personification or the, physical symbolism for the suffering that people have experienced, that it is right in your face through the form of these ghosts, is really interesting. I also just love the lore that's being brought in of particular goddesses or certain mythical creatures. I just find it so absolutely fascinating. And I'm really loving where I am. I'm in part 2 right now, and I loved the shift from part 1 to part 2. Part 2 is told in second person, and I know some people hate second person. I honestly don't understand why people hate it so much. It makes me think of, I've recommended the Broken Earth trilogy to so many people, and people sometimes really bounce off of the first book in that trilogy because it's told in second person, and I guess people really hate that. I don't know. I think it's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. And in both the Broken Earth trilogy, the 5th season, the first book, and in The Girl with a Thousand Faces, the second person is used for a very specific reason that makes complete sense. So it's fine. I think if it's well written, I don't care. People seem to have really strong feelings one way or the other with any of the tenses, I guess. Some people will not read first person. Some people will only read first person. I don't really care. As long as it's well written, I don't care. Any of the tenses are fine. I don't even know. I'm trying to think of what I could even say about the plot that wouldn't be a spoiler. I don't think so. I think literally anything I could say would be a spoiler. So all I will say is that I'm finding this very engaging, very immersive. I'm really loving it. I think the characters are very interesting. I think the writing generally is quite nice, and there are some really lovely moments and very descriptive, beautiful turns of phrase that I'm noticing and highlighting. I will say that from time to time, there are areas that feel a little clunky, often because of some repetition where it feels like a word is used twice within a paragraph or on the same page, when maybe another word could have been used instead, because it sort of jumps out at you because the word was just used and then we've used it again. Not that the words are anything sort of totally unusual or that they couldn't be used more than once. I just feel like there are a couple moments where I think to myself that maybe those could have been refined a little. And I don't remember having that feeling about The Book Eaters. I don't remember bouncing off the prose at any point, and it's really not terrible by any means. I'm very much nitpicking, but I'm just noticing it. So I wanted to point that out. Generally, I like the writing style quite a bit. And I do think in the second part, I'm enjoying the writing even more. It feels a little bit more lyrical, in part because of the context of the point of view. But there are just a couple moments here and there that I've found a little odd in terms of the word choice. And again, not that they're necessarily wrong by any means. I'm probably just being nitpicky and it's just my personal opinion, but just putting that out there. But yeah, the premise is so interesting. The world is very fascinating. I find the characters really engaging, and there have already been a couple things that shocked me. I'm trying to be so careful about how I talk about it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but a couple moments that really I did not see coming, and some things that I did guess, but they still were very satisfying when it was confirmed. So I'm having fun with it. And again, it was really hard to stop. I'm going to go finish it because I need to know what happens. So I'm going to do that. Will I do a spoiler section? A really short one. Okay. Spoilers for the first half of this book. So quick. I'm going to try to be the most efficient I've ever been. We're following Mercy, and our protagonist is different from everyone else. Not only can she not remember her childhood, but she also can talk to ghosts in a way that others can't seem to. It seems like ghosts listen to her. And instead of being an exorcist that is focused on banishing or killing them, she's focused on basically talking to them and listening to them and resolving their needs that way. And I find her very interesting, and I love her ghost cat companion, Bao. He's the best. We know that she has amnesia. We know she doesn't remember her childhood. We know that she can talk to ghosts in the way that other people can't. And she's having these dreams of a sea sister who is like the sea creature or maybe a ghost or something that she has these dreams about and won't talk to her. She tries to talk to her sea sister, and her sea sister doesn't talk back, and she doesn't remember the context for who this is because she doesn't remember her past or her childhood before she came to this neighborhood, to the city, but this has been sort of her constant companion. And at first I was like, okay, so are they actually sisters? Is she some sort of sea creature as well, and she can shapeshift or something, and that's part of why she can communicate with the ghosts in a way that regular human beings can't? But then her mother shows up, or who seems to be her mother, who recognizes her, and she at first is so excited to see Mercy, but then she becomes afraid and is talking about how, oh, you're the other one, you're not my daughter, you're the other one. And that was really interesting. And then I started to wonder if, in fact, the sea sister was her and she was a sea sister, if she's dreaming of her actual form and who she really is, and she had somehow like possessed or taken over the daughter of this woman, and she's dreaming of her true self. Just a theory, because then later on, once we get into part 2, and basically we get this other party who is saying, I know you can't remember your past, so let me tell you. And that's why it's in second person, because she's telling Mercy her own story of what happened 30 plus years ago. And her mother go to this island, and the island is full of ghosts. There's no one alive there. And Mercy, just in the last couple chapters, has met this sea creature, her sea sister. And I'm like, okay, wait, hang on. I'm not sure. There are 2 of them. I don't know. Are they going to like body swap somehow? I don't know. I find it really interesting. I love the description of her sea sister, who is implied to be a kind of mermaid from Chinese mythology. And the way she's described as being quite terrifying looking, but also sort of oddly beautiful. I just love those descriptions. I thought they were fascinating. And the ways that being under the water was described, I really loved in the last couple chapters. I also definitely saw it coming as soon as she went to investigate, because Cobra Lily had sent out her henchmen to take her out. And she was like, well, that seems out of character. I need to go learn more. And she sees Cobra Lily go into this room at this brothel, essentially. And then a different woman came out. I was like, oh my God, someone has body snatched. I think just because, there's ghosts everywhere, and we already have an example of a ghost possessing a little girl who she thought was alive, who actually was not. As soon as Cobra Lily went in and someone else came out, I was like, okay, there's a ghost possessing these bodies, and I was correct. She goes down to the basement, to the sewer, and sees that there are multiple options, multiple bodies, and this creature, the girl with 1,000 faces, is basically wearing them as skin suits, and one of them is her boss, but only as of, last night, which is why suddenly she turned on her. And it seems like the girl with 1,000 faces has a vendetta against Mercy, and Mercy has done something to her that she needs retribution for, but she needs Mercy to remember first, because it won't be satisfying to get an apology or justice unless Mercy knows what she is apologizing for or what she is paying for. So the intrigue is just building and building. And again, I have these theories about who the sea sister is and who the girl with 1,000 faces might be and who Mercy is and what her past is like, and how this ties to the story that we're now getting in the past on this remote island that is just inhabited with ghosts. But there's still so much that I feel we don't know and that is building. So even though part of me thinks that the sea sister is Mercy somehow and that she's dreaming of herself, now that I know that they both exist in the same time, maybe it is a possession thing, kind of like with the girl with 1,000 faces. And is she tied to them somehow? Is she one of them? I don't know. I just have theories, but I'm loving it. I'm finding it so fascinating and so engaging. And I really want to know what happens. So I'm going to stop talking. Those are just some of my theories, some ideas. And I'm going to go keep reading because I'm really enjoying this and I'm excited to know what happens. I would definitely, this is fantasy, I would say. It's sort of an urban fantasy setting, at least in the first part, because it is taking place in sort of the slums of Hong Kong, a neighborhood of the city, and it's taking place in the 70s. It's not a more traditional pre-industrial type fantasy setting, but it also has a lot of body horror and death and gore and discussion of real life war and pain and suffering and war crimes and tragedy, but also characters being murdered and then becoming ghosts and then murdering the people who murdered them. There's a lot of, it's also definitely horror. So just keep that in mind. If you're a fantasy reader who never reads horror, I would maybe not read this one. I wouldn't say that it's overly graphic and gory though, for the most part. So maybe it would be okay to dip your toe into if you want to try like a fantasy horror thing. But it could also get more gory. I'm not sure because I'm only halfway through. But anyway, I'm having fun. I'm going to go finish it because I barely exercised my willpower to stop to update you. So I'm going to go do that. and I'll be back when I finish it. So far, also I should note, I don't think we have any indication of our protagonist being queer. My understanding is that she is from my research, but so far that has not come up at all. There is some queer rep in that she has an old friend who she seeks out for advice and help, who has transitioned in the years since she last saw her, and she very quickly adjusts and, takes up her new name and has no issue using her proper pronouns. And I actually found the way they talked about it and then their dynamic moving forward really sweet and endearing. So there is queer rep, but it is in a secondary character who was only in the first part. Now that we're in the second part, that character is not around because it's before they would have met. So we'll see, I guess, if the protagonist ends up being obviously queer on page. I know the author is queer and is openly out and proud as a queer woman, so I wouldn't be surprised if the protagonist ends up being queer. And there was one line that I noted, actually, let me read it to you, that seemed like it was hinting at the protagonist being queer, but I don't think we've actually seen it on the page. Other people would be afraid, but the things you fear and the things you love have never quite lined up with the fears and loves of other people. But again, that was just in the last chapter I read, so we'll see if that goes anywhere. But I'm gonna go now. I've been talking for so long. I will see you soon. Do you want the good news or the bad news first? I'll start with the good news because I can't hear your response. The good news is I finished The Girl with a Thousand Faces and I really enjoyed it. The bad news is that this book does not have the level of queer rep that I was led to believe or that I expected. And I kind of feel like it didn't really fit for this video, unfortunately. For that reason, I'm gonna try to be a little bit more concise in my review because I was originally thinking I might read 3 books, maybe squeeze out 4. I think at this point, I definitely am going to have to read that 4th book because I'll get to it, I'll explain. But I'm not sure that this one really fit for this vlog. So pluses and minuses, pros and cons. But let's start with the pros. I did really enjoy this. I think that this is a really unique fantasy story. I loved the setting in China in the 70s and then also flashbacks to during the Second World War. I felt like it was such a unique take on fantasy, and it's definitely, I would say, a blending of fantasy and horror. And so much of what this book is doing is reckoning with the trauma of war and the casualties of war, but in such a literal way because this is a world with ghosts. And in a time of war, there are so many more deaths and there are so many more people who, didn't necessarily die in a peaceful way and are coming back as ghosts. And it's becoming this really serious issue where there are these vengeful, angry ghosts with a score to settle. and they are just everywhere en masse. And I think it was such a clever way to examine that trauma and the loss. I think that it was a really fascinating exploration as well of who we are and how connected or disconnected that is from our bodies. And I do think that that is the aspect that felt the most queer to me about this book. And that connection is explicitly made because the one queer character on page is a secondary character who is not really on page for that much of the book, which is again part of why I feel like this doesn't fit as well for this video as I had initially thought or hoped. Again, I will say there is a secondary character who is named and on the page, Erica, who is trans, and her transness is specifically called out and talked about. Our main character has not seen her since she transitioned, and so there is that moment of sort of realization and reckoning and the adjustment to her new name and pronouns, and it's handled in a very respectful, smooth way. It's a very supportive environment, and I appreciated that. I thought that that inclusion was great, and so there is some queer rep on the page, just not, the protagonist is not obviously queer on page. And the most obvious connection is in the main character has a bit of a quote, which I can't read for you in full or even describe the full scene for you because that would give away some spoilers for the end because this book goes in a lot of directions that you might not expect from the outset. But for me, the most, the connection between the main character and queerness was her having a moment with Erica and talking about how her body is part of who she is, but it's not everything. Her body doesn't make her who she is. If she didn't have her body anymore, or if she had a different body, she would still be her. And that she hopes that Erica can accept her regardless of what her body looks like. Then having Erica realize that that is similar to her own experience as a trans woman, that her body is important and is part of her, but it's not everything that she is, and that her body can change in pretty fundamental ways, in pretty significant ways, and she can still be her. So that was the moment that for me felt the most like it was tying some of the other ideas and some of the other maybe more magical, fantastical elements into a theme of queerness. And I appreciated that. I thought it was well done. Again, I'm just not sure that that was enough to feel that the main character specifically was queer rep, at least on page. So again, share your thoughts in the comments. But I need to be a little bit cagey about that because I don't want to spoil anything. And honestly, it is a little bit hard to talk about this book without spoilers. Again, it goes in a lot of directions that you might not expect from the outset. And there were some things that I was able to guess, theorize about ahead of time, but there were definitely some surprises along the way that were unexpected. And I really appreciated that because I think once you get past a certain threshold of reading a certain number of books, especially within a particular genre, and fantasy and horror are my two most read genres, you start to pick up on, the formulas. And even authors who are not formulaic per se, there's still, there are still conventions of each genre that exist for a reason, and it can start to feel a little predictable once you've read a certain number. And I really appreciated that this book, it didn't feel like it was trying to, pull the rug out from under me and trying to trick me or something, but I did feel like it was doing something very unique. It was a breath of fresh air, which is kind of ironic considering what this book is, but I can't say anything. Spoilers. I will say that this book definitely leans into the horror side of things. I think that if you don't typically read horror, but you're a fantasy reader, you could read this, but it might be a little bit darker than you are used to with fantasy. I wouldn't say that it's particularly gory. It doesn't really have body horror, but there are a couple moments that are pretty vivid in my mind that were intense. And I think probably a little unusual for your typical fantasy, which is why I definitely am emphasizing that this is fantasy horror. I do think though that the hardest part of reading this is just the subject matter and reckoning with the destruction of World War II, of the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong. It is pretty harrowing, as one would expect. I mean, what would anyone expect reading a book that is centered around a war? There's a lot of death, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of loss and grief and trauma, and this book is really reckoning with that, and again, using ghosts as a way to really embody that in a much more visceral on-page way than some books might. Things become much more literal, and not in a juvenile way or in a simplistic way, but in a way that makes it maybe a little bit more in your face and impactful. I did also feel, at first, I was a little bit iffy on the writing. Not that I thought it was poor by any means, and I think I talked about this in the first update, but I did feel that the writing style was a little bit clunky in places, maybe a little overworked almost. I did see, when I read the author's note, it seems like Sunny Dean was working on this book for quite a long time, and it sort of felt like this book took a lot more work and was more like pulling teeth than her past work. And I feel like I could kind of notice that in places. It seemed like maybe at first my thought was maybe that it was rushed a little bit or a little under edited, but now knowing that, I could feel like I can see the places where maybe the sentences were just worked so many times. And I know what this is like sometimes, where you just like, you try to restate something so many times, and your second or third take, your second or third draft was the best version. And then once you get to version 25, it's just diminishing returns. Like, you're getting more awkward and you're changing things that are more granular. And what you end up with is a little bit more overly engineered and less organic and less smooth and flowing than one of your earlier takes. And sometimes you just have to trust yourself and go with it. And I feel like I could notice that a bit, but I do think that the writing got better as the book went on. Again, I don't think the writing was ever bad. There were just some moments that jumped out to me as a little awkward. But as the book went on, I feel like there were more and more beautiful moments of prose, and also just the prose in general felt like it was a little bit more natural and flowing, and there was less of that over-engineered or constructed feeling to it. So that was great. I was happy that the writing sort of continued to blossom as the book continued. I also think that the characters and the direction that they were taken in was really interesting. And again, there's so much that I cannot say for spoiler reasons, so I'm going to have to be so cagey about this. I will say that while I found the characters fascinating, and I think they really are the heart of this book, I do also think that the characterization here is probably my biggest qualm with the book in general. Let me explain. And yes, as I mentioned in the halfway update, it does switch to second person in the second part and continues to be in second person through to the end. That didn't bother me at all. It makes sense based on the story that's being told. I think it was well done and well handled. In general, I don't mind second person. So if that is a big barrier to you, this might not be the book for you, but I will say that I felt it was well done. And maybe, it's okay to open your mind and try something different. I think the characters are fascinating. I think they are the heart of this book, but I also think that they are a little bit underdeveloped. And part of it is because of the unusual story structure, which is one of my favorite things about this book. Again, like I already said, it surprised me. It was unique, not only the setting and the way that it was using these fantastical elements to explore the themes, but also my favorite thing about this book is how unique it is. I think the mythical, magical elements are really cool. I think the ghosts are very cool, how they're used. I think that the way that this book explores its themes and its setting are very well done. And just in general, this was a very unique and refreshing experience. And I do think that the characters are what makes that work, because they are the heart of this story. And I feel like it's important to care about them, to be really emotionally invested in what this book is trying to do, and to really fully feel the tragedy of this situation, both on an individual level, but also on a larger scale, on a world war type of scale. But I do think that the characters, in part because of that really unique structure, were not always as deeply developed as I wanted. There is something that is lost switching from third person in the first part, following Mei-Chi, Mercy, to second person in the second part, and sort of changing how the story is being told, and also bringing in some other characters to focus on. And it's necessary for the story that's being told. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the second person, but I do think that maybe immersing us so much in Mei-Chi's story, in Mercy's story in the 70s in the first part, and it's in third person, and having us in that headspace for quite a while, and then switching to the second part, switching to second person, having a different perspective, which I think was well handled and I didn't mind, but you get used to this one mode to be in, this one tense and this one time period and character. And then we go to a different time period. We're now back during the Second World War, and the tense is different and the perspective is different and the writing style is slightly different. And I didn't necessarily find it jarring, but I do think that it meant that not every character got the same amount of development that Mercy did, because of how the story started and because we spent so much time focused on her at the beginning. And I think that was to the detriment of some of the other characters. And again, I found them all interesting and I cared about them. I was invested in them. I thought they were well developed. I just think that it was a little bit uneven in the time it spent on different characters and the way that it was split up. And because of that, you sort of become attached to certain characters at certain times, and you might slowly start to forget about them or start to become attached to someone else and see someone else's perspective. And then when they come back in, you might not quite resonate with them as much. It was just a little bit disjointed is maybe the wrong word, but I do think that the structure was maybe a little chunky or blocky, and maybe the dreaded alternating chapters, alternating points of view, which I know some people hate, and I have also disliked depending on how it's handled at times, but it is common in fantasy, and again, maybe it's a genre convention for a reason. Maybe sometimes genre conventions exist because they make sense and they work. Because while I appreciate that this book was doing something really different, I do think that splitting the sections up the way that they were was a little bit to the detriment of the character development and to my investment as a reader. And again, all of that is as vague as possible because I don't want to spoil anything for you. I think the last thing I can say without spoilers, because I'm really struggling to talk about this book without spoiling anything, I really liked the way the book ended. I think that there was something very poetic about the ending, and I found it sort of oddly hopeful in a way that I didn't expect leading up to it, because I wouldn't say that this book is particularly hopeful most of the way through. And yet I also found it a little confusing and maybe slightly underexplained, because it felt like one thing was being set up and then it sort of played out in a slightly different way. And I didn't quite feel like we were given the reason why it happened differently and how. And I felt like I needed even the tiniest hint leading up to it that that was a possibility, or that that was what was going to happen, or at least that it was more open-ended. It felt very definitive about how things were going to play out at the end, and then it played out differently, and it just kind of felt like, what? I thought something else was happening. This is happening. I mean, okay, I'm fine with it, but I thought, what about plan A? We're just ignoring plan A. We're doing plan B now. Okay, no one told me, but it's fine. That's how it felt as a reader. And again, it's fine. I liked the ending. I thought it was poetic. I thought it was hopeful. I felt like it fit. And I actually think I like it better than the ending that was being set up. But I thought it was odd that we set up ending A and then we got ending B. And it's not the end of the world. It's not the biggest. I have read other books where the ending was way further off from what I expected or what I wanted. In this case, it is maybe, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a tiny difference, but it's not a huge deal. It's not make or break for me. I just thought it was kind of strange the way that it sort of flipped at the very end there. But again, very hard to talk about without spoilers. So I think that's all I'm going to say. I did really enjoy this quite a bit, despite some of my qualms. So now I'm going to do a spoiler section, and I'm going to try to address all the things that I brought up in the non-spoiler section, hopefully, and give more details for those of you who have read this book. So skip the section if you don't want spoilers for The Girl with 1,000 Faces. And then I will give you my rating and we'll decide what book to read next. Hopefully one with much more explicit queer up on the page for the protagonist. One can only hope. Okay, spoilers for The Girl with 1,000 Faces, starting now. Okay, so where do I start? Basically, let's start with the structure. Why not? I both love that Sunny Dean took such a huge swing with this unusual structure, but I do think it was maybe not a total miss, but maybe the first baseman caught it and they're immediately out. That's baseball is the one sport that I have played and know literally anything about. But anyway, that's maybe the one and only time I'll ever use a sports metaphor on my channel. My point is, I really enjoyed the switch to second person, and it made so much sense to have this goddess who has witnessed Mei-Chi's entire life and everything that happened to her, and was begged by Mei-Chi as a young girl who was dying this horrific death for her to remember her. And so she has continued to be a witness to her life. For her to be telling this story because Mei-Chi has forgotten her past. And I loved I hesitate to call it a twist because I don't feel like anything in this book is really set up as a twist. It was more so like there were many layers and they were being revealed over time in a way that was very interesting and engaging. But anyway, I enjoyed finding out that Mei-Chi is not the original owner of her body and that she actually was a ghost and she murdered someone and stole their body. And because she was wearing it so long, she forgot her past and who she used to be and just thinks that she's a person. I thought that was fantastic. I did not see that coming whatsoever. She kept having these dreams about her sea sister. And there was a time when I thought maybe she was the sea sister and that she was like some sort of a sea monster or a mermaid, and that this was just her human form and she'd somehow forgotten that she could transform herself. And that's not totally wrong because she is sea sister, but she's not a sea monster or a mermaid. She is a ghost, just a water ghost because she died by drowning. And so I just think it really makes a lot of sense to go to the second person and to tell her story back to her because she doesn't remember it. And I loved that it was told as if she were Su Yin and that she changed her name because she forgot who she was, or, something weird happened with her name. We don't know what, but learning that, following the story, thinking that she is the young girl coming to this island with her mother after a long time and meeting this amazing sea creature and becoming friends with her. And we think that this is her origin story and, something's going to happen for her to be washed up ashore in a shipwreck and start the journey that we know with her. And then to have the realization that actually Su Yin is her niece and she murdered Su Yin and stole her body and then forgot about it is just such a punch in the gut. And then to switch perspectives and follow Su Yin, who is the girl with 1,000 faces and became a water ghost herself and became this vengeful ghost determined to get revenge because her life and body were stolen by her aunt. It blew me away, honestly. I thought it was so well done. I did not see it coming that way. And I thought it was quite devastating, especially for Su Yin, how many times the adults in her life failed her. And how many times she was abandoned and betrayed by her family just for it to happen again and again. She is so traumatized, not only from everything she witnessed in the war, but even before that because of her family. And it's just so heartbreaking. And it's even more heartbreaking. And I loved the detail that Mei-Chi actually felt terrible when she realized what happened. There were a lot of circumstances that led to her being taken pretty far from the island before she was aware really fully of what had happened. And once she was aware, she knew she had to go back and try to fix it and find Su Yin. But she was so quickly forgetting the details and where the island was and what it was called and even Su Yin's name and who she was that by the time she was able to maybe try to get back, she'd forgotten everything. And it's just so devastating because you watch it slip away and you know that Su Yin is about to spend a very, very long time feeling completely abandoned and feeling like she was tricked and used. And Mei-Chi doesn't even know what happened. She doesn't know what she did because she forgets all about it. Devastating. But like I said, I think that because we spent so much time with Mei-Chi in the 70s getting to know her, and then we go back in time when we follow Su Yin, who at first we think is Mei-Chi as a young person, and then we realize is actually not. And then we follow Su Yin as a woman in her young 20s and her relationship with her mom and her experience on the island and then getting murdered, getting drowned and having her body stolen and being turned into a water ghost and then becoming the girl with 1,000 faces. And then we continue to follow her for quite a long time through the war as she's working with this resistance group and building up her rage and need for revenge. And then we continue to follow her as she's trapped in a gourd, a magical gourd. That's got to be based on something. I have to do research. I need to remind myself to do research into that because I thought the whole section of trapping the ghosts through a ritual into a gourd was very interesting. And I don't think I've ever heard anything like it. So I have to remember to look it up. But she's then trapped and barely holding on to her sanity for a very long time. And then she gets let out and she takes over the body of the woman who wanted to use her for her own ends and creates this whole plan. Like we get everything from her perspective and it goes on for a very long time. And we are not checking in with Mei-Chi, who all we know is that at the end of Mei-Chi's section, she was drowned in a barrel. And at first we thought that meant she was dead. And now we know she's a ghost. So she'll probably be fine. But she's just in the barrel that whole time. We haven't checked in a very, very long time. And then we go back to her. And by the time we go back to her, not only have I spent so much time with Su Yin that I'm struggling to reconnect to Mei-Chi a little bit, but I also, as much as I understand that Mei-Chi didn't know what was happening and didn't mean to do what she did necessarily because she didn't know she even could do that, and also wanted to go back but lost her memory, I also kind of was losing a little bit of sympathy for Mei-Chi because she did set all of this in motion. She did, in fact, murder Su Yin, and maybe she couldn't help it because, she was Ghost and she had these urges and she didn't even fully recognize what she was doing, but she did still do it, actually. So it was a little bit hard to feel for her at that point. And yeah, Su Yin had kind of gone off the deep end, but I mean, I get it, girl. She'd been through a lot. Her own mother rode away crying after her daughter got hit by lightning and then was drowning in the ocean during a storm. And her mom just left her there to die. Imagine. And then her own aunt stabbed her in the lung with her claw so that she would drown and then stole her body and left her alone to turn into a water ghost all by herself. It's a lot. And she lost her dad prior to all this. Like, she's just been abandoned by everyone. So I get it. I get Su Yin. Anyway, I just think that as cliche as it seems to do the alternating timelines of back in the 40s and then back in the 70s and following Mei-Chi and then following Suyin. I think it would have made more sense for this and maybe would have helped to keep me connected to both of them all the way through instead of getting me invested in Mercy and then dropping her for a very, very long time and then bringing her back at the end. Again, I applaud the uniqueness. I applaud trying something different. I'm just not totally sure that it completely worked. And I think for me, it definitely impacted my connection to the characters a little bit. And I am such a character-driven reader that was honestly the point that for me brought this down from what could have been a 5-star read, just because I wasn't as emotionally invested in both of them as equally as I would have wanted to be by the end, to make that ending conflict and that decision at the end more heartbreaking. The idea that only one of them can go forward. And then the reveal at the very end that they actually both are going to be together and they can both live and maybe they can build a new relationship together and not be alone, which I love, except that the whole ending was setting up that Mei-Chi was going to finally go to rest, that she was going to move on and she was going to let Suyin have her body back and try again and try to have a life of some kind. And that seemed sad, but also like maybe it made sense and maybe it was right for Mei-Chi to finally try to find peace. You know, she was very hard done by. She didn't deserve to die as a young child. She was abandoned by her sister, Suyin's mom, and the whole village who just left her to die and drown in this cave after she fell and became paralyzed. Instead of trying to help her, they just left her to die and then left her body there to rot and didn't bury her or anything. You know, she was very hard done by as a child just because she had this connection to the gods. She had this ability to create storms and that scared everyone. And still, that doesn't, excuse what she did to Suyin, which is again what this book is talking about, cycles of abuse, generational trauma, continuing to cause harm to each other. And there are explanations for why we perpetuate the harm that we experienced onto others, but it doesn't excuse our actions. It doesn't mean that our actions aren't continuing to harm other people. And it doesn't mean that we can't try to interrupt that pattern or break the cycle. But the ending that Mei-Chi is back to her water spirit, her water ghost form, and that her sea sister form, and that Suyin is able to be sort of reborn into her body, I think it's implied that she is still going to be a ghost, just kind of possessing her old body. But if she's in it long enough, she will forget that and just feel that she's a person, and that maybe they can go back to being shore sister and sea sister and have the kind of proper friendship and family relationship that they should have had from the beginning, hopefully without the baggage and the trauma, at least a little bit less, and start over. And I think that that's lovely and poetic, and I think it's better than the alternative of them being left alone. Either one of them being left alone after everything they went through. But I do think it's weird that the ending was set up for one scenario so firmly, and then it just was something different with no indication that that was going to happen. And I just wonder why it was done that way. I don't know. Maybe it was just meant to be another surprise. I just thought it was kind of odd. Most of the surprises through the book felt very well done and felt like they were, once they happen, you see all the signs and it makes sense. And you realize that that's what was happening all along. The ending surprise or twist felt like more of an actual twist where you just think, okay, where did that come from? Not a bad ending to land on, just wasn't really built up to. I loved Bao, the ghost cat. I feel that Bao was underutilized. Again, Bao had a starring role in the first part, and Bao and Mercy together were a great duo. And then, Bao was kind of there in the periphery in the 1940s section, and then the whole section following the girl with 1,000 faces, Suyin, Bao was not there. And then Bao's there again at the end. But briefly, I just feel like I was really sold. One of the reasons why I picked this book up so early on in this video, and one of the reasons why I ranked it so high, is because of the ghost cat. And the ghost cat was great, but again, underutilized. And if it had, not to harp on this, but if it had been alternating timelines, Bao would have been there through the whole book, and that would have been great. I would have appreciated it. Anyway, I think that the mother, Suyin's mother, was a really interesting character. Honestly, she might have been the most interesting character to me, but I do feel like there were some moments that, in part because she was a secondary character and we were never really following her. I mean, we were never in the head of any of the characters because it was never in first person, but we didn't follow her. She wasn't a protagonist, and she had a lot of trauma and a lot of complexity to her, and I just feel like I wanted more from that character. I feel like there were some moments, especially the moment when she left Suyin to drown, that I just thought, okay, I get that she's not Mother of the Year, but really? This is what she's doing? Really? And even with her sister too. Okay, I get that she's not a perfect person and she has flaws, but really she's gonna let her little sister drown because she can't be bothered to find a rope on her own and a single person who will help, or I don't know, like hold on to a rock. I just feel like there were options. She tried nothing and was all out of ideas. She brought the village over and the village said, yeah, leave her there. And she was like, okay, that's all I can do, I get. Like, what? I get that you're a child, but come on now, really? And then after all that, even at that point, she decides, okay, I'm going to let my little sister drown. I'm not going to try to save her. Also, I'm not even going to stay with her until she dies. I'm going to leave because it's too hard to watch her die. What? And then she abandons her daughter. Like, maybe this is who she is. I guess there are people like that. I just felt like I needed more explanation for why she's like that. I get that we understood for Suyin, or Suyin had the theory or came to understand, or I think it was maybe the goddess who was talking, who said that she was too afraid to lose more people and she was afraid to love and show her love openly because she was afraid that she would lose that again after what happened with her sister and her whole village and most of her family dying on a single night, because her sister, as she was dying, created a huge storm that basically killed everyone on the island. I get that part of it, and I suppose that's why she never fully connected to Suyin, to her daughter. But I also, I don't understand the initial choice. And again, she's not a main character. I just felt like I needed a little bit more. I needed a few more answers for why this happened. I needed a few more constraints, either inward or outwardly imposed, to explain, especially the first instance with her sister, but then also again the second time, because I get that a storm was starting and she was afraid and she has trauma from the first storm, but that's enough to let your daughter drown in front of you. You can't row back for 2 milliseconds and help your daughter out of the ocean. Trauma responses are hard to explain. I know. And maybe that is, again, part of the themes of trauma being, this huge, messy thing that impacts different people differently and travels with you in sometimes unpredictable ways and in ways that can really severely impact your life. And it can cause you to act in ways that you never would otherwise. So maybe, but I just feel like it all would have landed. I still would have hated her choices, but I think it would have landed better for me if I got to know her just a little bit better or had a little bit more time with her, I think. But I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts if you've read this book, because I see what it's doing with trauma and how it's exploring trauma for all three of them in their own unique ways. And I think that her mother is a really interesting exploration of how trauma can impact someone. But I think knowing her better as a person would have made that land better for me, is what I'm saying, I guess. I think the mechanics of all the ghosts was very cool. I think the talking to ghosts, rather than being an exorcist, she's basically a therapist for the ghosts. And then she gives them the permission to do whatever they need to do to find rest. And I love the reveal that she's able to talk to ghosts in a way that no one else seems to be able to, because she is also a ghost. She just doesn't remember. I also love the whole girl with 1,000 faces thing and the mechanics of the water ghosts being able to take on bodies as long as they drown the victim, that they can then take on the body, and that the taking on a body allows them to finally have a moment without the pain of suffocation or drowning. I think one of the most harrowing moments for me was when Suyin is murdered and turns into a ghost, and her first moments as a ghost, and she feels that she's drowning and she surfaces trying to relieve that feeling and still feels that feeling and realizes that she can't breathe anymore, and that part of becoming a water ghost, a water spirit, is feeling forever that feeling of drowning, like you can't breathe. And that is horrific. Everything about it is horrific, but that aspect specifically, I found myself, even just now talking about it, but reading it, I felt myself holding my breath and then feeling that pain start to build up when you haven't taken a breath in a while. And just, I can't imagine living like that. Or I guess they're not living because they're dead, but you know what I mean. Anyway, yeah, I think that's all for spoilers. Hopefully that clarified things enough from what I said in the non-spoiler section. I do really think this is so unique and so interesting, and I was very engaged in it, and I think it did so many things so well. There were just a few things that didn't quite slot into place for this to be brand new favorite of all time sort of thing, but it was very interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to talk about it. Share all of the things. Just mark your comment with spoilers and hit enter a few times so that other people aren't spoiled if they haven't read it yet. I think that I am landing at 4 stars for this. I thought it was really unique. It was very engaging and immersive. I loved the world building. I loved the magical, mythical elements. I loved the unique storytelling and the structure, even if I do think in some ways the structure itself was one of the things that made the book not quite land perfectly for me. I do think that it did so many interesting things. I did still really, really enjoy this. I was kind of entranced by it. And it is the kind of book that I see myself rereading in the future. I think it would actually be incredibly rewarding on a reread. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read it. And I would recommend it if you're interested, if it sounds intriguing to you. But again, maybe not the best pick for this video. So I want to pick my next book. So I have a few options. The next book in order was Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane, but my understanding is that that is sort of a series of vignettes, a couple different stories, and only one of them has queer characters. And I kind of want a book where we are following a queer protagonist who is on page queer through the entire book next. So John of John by Douglas Stewart is next on the list. So that could be an option. However, I also am feeling a little bit, I really like Spoiled Milk and The Girl with a Thousand Faces, but they were both a little darker in content and a little more emotionally draining for me. So part of me kind of wants to pick up something a little bit more lighthearted. And then maybe after that, I could finish off with something like John of John, because my impression from reading the blurb and the description of the book is that John of John is going to be pretty melancholic, which is not a bad thing. I enjoy melancholic books, but I feel like I need a little bit of I need a little variety in this situation, I think. So I'm intrigued by Whoever You Are, Honey. I really don't know what the tone is of that one. Girl Dinner by Olive Blake, I think is going to be more satirical, lighthearted, but I've had such mixed experiences with Olive Blake in the past that I'm a little nervous that I might be one of the ones that doesn't land for me. Okay, I did a little bit more research and more deliberating with myself, and I think I have decided to read Whoever You Are, Honey by Olivia Gatwood. This, I believe I picked this in my very first Aardvark box ever, my second ever box in July 2025. So I've had this one for a while, so it might be nice to get it off my TBR. And I really enjoyed reading the first chapter. I just found it so eerie and instantly intriguing. And as far as I can tell, the main character is explicitly queer on the page, that it is part of the book and the themes being explored, that it is definitely 100% on page rep that is important to the story, which would be great. I also, the more research that I did in trying to get a sense of the tone, I wouldn't say that this is lighthearted necessarily according to what people are saying, but the more descriptions I was reading, the more intrigued I became. So I think I might pick this one up. I'm going to give it a go. We'll see what happens. I'm going to go start Whoever You Are, Honey. I'll be back when I get to the halfway point to let you know how it's going, and we'll just keep going. We're going to get more queer rep come hell or high water. Okay. I'm halfway through Whoever You Are, Honey by Olivia Gatwood, and I am really enjoying this. The atmosphere in this is impeccable. It is so tense and eerie and just full of nostalgia. There is this sense of sort of dreary and slightly unsettling memory to everything. The combination of Mitty, who feels almost trapped in a snow globe of her past, and she can't escape that constant memory of what happened in her past when she was younger with Esme, and we don't know exactly what happened yet, but there's this ominous sense that something bad happened and that she was involved. And then for Lena, the opposite, where she has so few memories and her memories are so disjointed and so nonlinear. They have no beginning, middle, and end. They're just little snippets or vignettes. And she's almost trapped in the opposite way in the present, in a snow globe in the present, in this dollhouse where she feels like she has no past and she has no future. And her lack of memory is distressing to her. And I just find it so interesting. Then we have Bethel, who is very much living in her memories in many ways and sort of trapped by what her life used to be and what she's lost now that she's in her 70s. And it's so interesting. I love the atmosphere. I love how eerie and tense everything is. I love how everything feels a little bit off and unsettling and strange. It has a very languid quality to it. It's very I wouldn't say it's super slow paced, but it does feel very measured and like it's taking its time in a way that I appreciate. I like the writing style. It is pretty straightforward. Third person, present tense, definitely on the simpler side prose wise. It's not trying to be incredibly lyrical or anything, but I do feel like there are quite a few interesting moments that again are maybe more impactful because of their simplicity. It's not trying to make the language itself beautiful. It's trying to convey meaning, and one is not better than the other necessarily, as long as the words convey meaning, which I do think is kind of maybe a base requirement for a book, usually. I mean, there are some exceptions, but generally. But I do think it's okay to prioritize the message being told in a beautiful way while also conveying something. And it's also okay to prioritize the message that you are conveying and using the language as a means to convey it without the language itself being the most important factor. You know, there are quite a few little moments that I have highlighted as quotes. And a lot of the quotes that I really like are imagery of being trapped, escaping, screaming silently. There is definitely this ominous quality all the way through. And part of that is a big theory that I have around one of our two protagonists who were primarily following two young women who are now neighbors. Mitty, who is living with a family friend in her 70s, Bethel, and they've been living together for 10 years. And they are sort of the last house in this neighborhood of the old guard, and everyone else is moving into these newly renovated mega mansions, and they're all tech bros and their partners. And next door, the house was turned into this, what they call the doll house, and this man, Sebastian, has moved in with his girlfriend of 2 years, Lena. And Lena is sort of our other protagonist. And Mitty and Lena meet, and they start to develop this friendship and realize they have more in common than they might have thought. And they're both getting a bit of a window into each other's lives. And both of them have mysterious histories that we have not learned a lot about. It's definitely keeping secrets from us, the reader. In Mitty's case, she knows what happened, but no one's telling us. And in Lena's case, again, part of her characterization is that she has few memories. So it is also a mystery to her in some ways. And I am pretty sure I know what's going on with Lena. I don't think the book is particularly interested in keeping it a secret, but I do feel like it's a bit of a spoiler if I am correct, even though from probably the second or third chapter, I already had this theory. And I don't feel like the text is really trying to keep it a secret. It feels pretty obvious. It feels like we're meant to know and the characters are meant to slowly figure it out, which is a totally valid storytelling technique, and I actually really like it. I am currently reading another book that is also sapphic. I should mention that Mitty is, I believe, a lesbian, and Lena seems to also possibly have some sort of sapphic attraction, or at least curiosity in that sense. I'm reading another sapphic book right now, Safekeep, which I'm also making a reading vlog for. And some of the storytelling technique that feels like we know exactly what the character is going through and what they're experiencing, and they don't, and we're just waiting for them to catch up, and watching them figure it out is part of it's the journey. It's what the book is about. It feels like both of these are doing a similar thing. So it's not necessarily a spoiler, but it kind of is also, I think. So I'm only going to say it in the spoiler section. And you can decide for yourself if you think that hearing my theory that I think is being telegraphed from very early on is a spoiler for you or not, but just in case you think it might be, I will refrain from mentioning it in the non-spoiler section. But I'm really enjoying this. I think the characters are really interesting. Like I said, the atmosphere really has grabbed hold of me. I am so entranced by the vibe of it all. I think I know what's going to happen, but I'm very excited to get there. That's not reducing my interest at all. I will say if it was meant to be a surprise, what I'm pretty sure it's doing, then it's not very effective because it's not surprising at all. But I'm pretty sure it's not meant to be. I do maybe think that it would maybe have been fun for that to be drawn out a little bit longer and not telegraphed quite as clearly a little bit longer, so that there's a touch more curiosity and mystery, and then for it to be more and more and more hinted at. Whereas I feel like the way it was set up, it was pretty obvious from very early on, which again is fine. It doesn't have to be a thriller with a big twist. It can just be telling the story. Also, Esme, this girl from Middy's past, her ex-girlfriend, essentially, is a dancer. And there are a couple chapters that are in the past showing what happened when Middy was a teenager. And there is one that starts by describing the ballerinas in town and all these high school girls who are studying ballet very seriously and hoping to be accepted into companies. And I wonder if Olivia Gatwood went to a pre-professional ballet program, because as someone who has gone to one, she was spot on. It was actually really funny reading those sections. I felt so transported back to high school and my experience attending a ballet school with all my fellow ballet students. I will say none of us smoked, nor were we encouraged to smoke. Other than that, very accurate and very evocative. And some of the ways that Olivia Gatwood wrote the dynamic in general, but also specifically Esme and some of her thoughts about dancing and a potential career and fear of injury and things like that, feel, again, very informed by someone who has had that experience, and it feels very specific. So anyway, that was kind of fun. Just, if you are someone who has studied ballet, you might enjoy that section. I'm not sure I would pick up the book just for that, because so far it's pretty minor. It's only a little section of a chapter in the past, but I was pleasantly surprised by how accurate it felt, because I've definitely read books where they include a dancer or talk about ballet or something else that, I have personal experience with, and I just think that's not what it's like at all. You don't know what you're talking about. But that was not the case here, which is nice. I will also say that when Lena first started talking about her memory and it being so spotty, I wrote some notes in the margin of, oh, finally I read a character like me. That's what my memory is like. But as it's gone on, I feel like there are other explanations potentially for why her memory is like that, which is making me kind of sad, because at first I felt like finally I had found a character who also had the crappiest memory of all time and could barely remember their childhood. But seems like I just might have a crappy memory and this character has other stuff going on to explain it, whereas I have no excuse other than ADHD, which is kind of an excuse. But alas. Anyway, I'm going to talk just the tiniest bit of spoilers about what I think this is doing and what my theory is. That again, it doesn't feel like a super spoiler, but maybe for you it will be. And then I'm going to go keep reading this because I have to know what happens next. Spoilers for the first half of Whoever You Are, Honey, starting now. Okay, so basically from, like I said, maybe the second or third chapter, very early on, we hear that a local tech bro was murdered by a group of interns. And the theory is, or the rumor is, that he had come forward saying that an AI program that they were working on, he believed it had become sentient. And he was a whistleblower saying this is no longer ethical. This is a sentient being. Things have to change. There has to be some sort of regulation, or, we have to consider this being's rights. And then they were murdered. So we have that set up from the very beginning, which starts you thinking about a sentient AI. And then we meet Sebastian, who knows that man, and it becomes clear very early on that they were not only coworkers, but possibly very close coworkers working together on a project at the time that this other man, Pax, was killed. And his girlfriend of 2 years, Lena, who barely remembers her childhood. All of her memories are very specific, vivid, short moments where she doesn't remember anything before or after. She barely remembers what she did before she met Sebastian. She has no interests outside of what he tells her to do. She has this hyper-aware sense of when he is approaching, even though no one else can hear him coming or see him in the dark at night by a bonfire. She seems to have these rules she has to follow, like being home before he gets home every day, which could be, there are aspects of this that seem like they could be meant to be indicating that they're in this high control, sort of abusive dynamic, or that she is the AI, that she is a robot and she's sentient, and that Sebastian shut it down and had Pax killed because he is dating the sentient AI and he doesn't want the program shut down and he doesn't want her taken away and to have her own rights, because he's living out his fantasy with his robot girlfriend who will have sex whenever he wants, in whatever ways he wants, and do everything he says, and is his possession, which seems very clearly to be what's happening. And every moment we spend with Lena, for me, is reinforcing that she is in fact some sort of robot or AI. It feels very clear and very obvious. And from the very beginning, when she's first introduced and she's just more beautiful and more perfect than anyone else has ever been, like she remembers everything. She seems to have a perfect memory. But then there's moments where they start having an uncomfortable conversation, or she's about to ask Sebastian something difficult, or he's revealing something, for example, about his relationship with Pax, or the fact that Pax had to go, that he literally says he had to go. She faints. She has these fainting spells. And when she comes to, she forgets some of the time before her fainting spell, almost like it's a hard reset where he can wipe some of her memory. I'm like 99.9999% sure that Lena is a robot and is the sentient AI. There are so many examples. I literally have a tab color just for the hints that that is what's happening, and it might be my most used tab. But like I said, I'm not sure that it's meant to be a surprise or a twist. I think we are supposed to assume that and understand that from the beginning, but Lena doesn't know, and obviously Mitty doesn't know, and that the book is the process of Lena figuring it out and then maybe recruiting Mitty to help get out of this situation and escape and be able to live as a person and actually create her own life as a person instead of playing the role of Sebastian's perfect girlfriend. I do think there are moments that are a bit heavy-handed, especially to do with Sebastian pretty clearly being the one to order the hit on Pax. I feel like it could be more subtle than it actually is. Him literally saying he had it coming or he had to go. He had to go, I think is exactly what he said. It feels a little on the nose. I just want you to know that you're safe, he says, leading them to the left, his voice sobering. He's still got his arm around her, but he's looking up at the trees. I know I'm safe, but he had to go, Sebastian continues. She feels his grip tighten on her shoulder. He was questioning things, getting into ethics. That kind of thing worries me. She attempts to stop abruptly, but the force of him pulls her along. Just let me talk, he says. Her ears are peaked, blood collecting behind her eyes. Whatever that means. I don't know what blood collecting behind her eyes means, but anyway, when people start getting self-righteous about their goodness, that's when they get dangerous, because they've already decided they don't trust you. And so they're also operating from a place of deflection, wanting to get on the right side of history before it becomes clear they weren't always. He spits. He was afraid of seeming bad. He was afraid of his own involvement. And then just as she's about to say, what do you know, Sebastian? Her vision gets narrow, his face traveling farther from her at the end of a wet tunnel, and then everything goes dark. You fainted again. She tries to remember the moments before she lost consciousness, attempting to locate a trigger, but nothing remains. She feels fine, actually. It's her memory that's always affected, the hours prior to fainting that go blank. What were we talking about, she says. Nothing important, he says. Without warning, he picks her up and throws her over his shoulder like a knapsack. Anyway, it doesn't have to be a mystery or a thriller where we don't know anything and we're trying to put it together until the last moment. It's fine for us to kind of be putting it together as we go along, even if some of the main characters like Lena or Mitty haven't figured it out yet. I just feel like it maybe could have been fun to drag it out a little longer and keep a little bit more of the mystery alive. That being said, I'm still totally engaged and want to know what happens next, even though I am, again, 99.9% sure that Sebastian put out the hit on Pax because Pax wanted to blow the whistle that Lena, his girlfriend, is a sentient AI robot. So, I mean, Olivia Gatwood's doing something right, because I feel like there is very little mystery except not knowing exactly what happened with Esme in Mitty's past, but I'm still intrigued and want to know what happens next. So, those are my thoughts so far. Mitty obviously is attracted to Lena and has a crush on her. It seems like Lena maybe feels something for Mitty back. It almost feels like she has a crush on Mitty and that's her first original thought, or her first original crush, her first relationship that she's building on her own as her own person outside of Sebastian and separated from what he wants from her, and that her love of Sebastian is like a programming thing and less a natural feeling. So I'll be curious to see if their relationship does progress into something mutual and romantic or sexual, or if it's sort of a one-sided thing for Mitty and not reciprocated and it remains more of a friendship thing. Very curious to see where that goes, but I'm really enjoying this. I love the atmosphere so much and I want to know where it goes. I can predict multiple ways it could end up. I kind of hope that Mitty and Lena can escape together. Maybe they can find a similar wood-paneled vehicle that Bethel got rid of back in the day, and Bethel can drive them off as their getaway driver, and they can go on an adventure together. Maybe after Lena kills Sebastian to free herself in some sort of intense climax moment where it's him or her, where he's going to shut her down forever unless she escapes. I don't know. Just thoughts and feelings. I feel like because I've read a lot of sci-fi and I have been watching, we're a couple seasons in now, but my husband and I have been watching The Twilight Zone. So I'm seeing some old school sci-fi. I've also watched Star Trek all the Star Trek that exists, which also has some original, some old school sci-fi, although obviously that came after the Twilight Zone started. But I've also just read so much sci-fi. I've read a lot of horror. I've read books like Annie Bot, and which I didn't love personally. I know a lot of people love that book, but I just feel like I have a lot of exposure to this idea of like a Stepford wife robot that maybe if I had less exposure to all of those influences, I would not see it coming quite as quickly. But I also, like I said, feel like it's pretty clear on the page. And I don't think that Olivia Gatwood thinks that she is being subtle necessarily, because I feel like she's clearly smart enough. I feel like I trust her enough as an author from how she's handling everything else that she could be subtle if she wanted to be, but that she's not trying to be subtle about Sebastian's involvement and about Lena's true nature. I feel like the biggest mystery for me right now is what actually happened with Esme. And I feel like it's setting it up to be something like Mitty killed her by mistake or something. But it also could easily just be that they were found out and they lived in a homophobic place, which also seems like there are indications that that could have been the case. But also there are some hints that Mitty maybe has an issue with obsession a little bit, or like voyeurism, maybe a little bit of not stalking, but she has some tendencies. And so I almost wonder if there's a bit of an unreliable narrator thing where she's remembering her interactions with Esme in one way, but that actually it was more of a stalking thing, especially because she was telling stories specifically of past serial killers and stuff. So there's something there where like maybe Mitty is not what she seems to be and is a very unreliable narrator. But it's also possible that it is the way she's saying it. And again, it was just homophobic people being homophobic, acting like it was the end of the world, that two teenage girls mutually liked each other and wanted to kiss, But we'll see. We'll see how it progresses from here. But I think that's it for spoilers. And I think that's all I'm going to say for this right now. I really want to know what happens next. So I'm going to go keep reading. I'm excited. I have finished Whoever You Are, Honey, and this did not end the way I expected it to. I mean, in some ways it did. I think the ending was not bad by any means, but it was a little anticlimactic for me personally. An ending that doesn't answer all your questions, totally valid and fine. I sometimes even prefer those endings to endings that work a little too hard to answer every single question or feel a little too convenient. However, in this case, I just wanted a little bit more. I think also because it was telegraphing so many of the different elements so early on, and then it never actually confirmed or denied so many of the things that it was hinting through almost the entire book. That made it more frustrating to me. I think if the reveals had been slower, where we'd only kind of maybe realized or come to a more solidified theory of the various mysteries near the end, maybe leaving it open would have felt natural. But because so many of those things were basically answered with a heavy wink, wink, nudge, nudge, even if they weren't explicitly stated on the page from pretty early on, I feel like the fact that the ending just didn't circle back to some of those things or just left them completely open felt a little frustrating to me personally. That being said, I had a really good time with this. I really liked it. I really liked the writing style. I loved how atmospheric it was. I loved the sort of eerie, melancholic vibe all the way through. I thought the characters were interesting. I was very drawn into it and I had a good time with it. Overall, I just felt that the ending wasn't quite as much of a slam dunk for me personally as I had hoped for. And still, it didn't ruin the experience by any means. I really enjoyed this. I would recommend it. I just would go into it. I would tell you to go into it if you choose to without expecting an ending that answers the questions that the book raises, because that's not really what it's interested in doing, which is fine. I think it's also the setup of the book. It kind of has an element of a murder mystery. It kind of has an element of possibly speculative something or other going on, and maybe even horror on some level. If you treat it as any of those genres or go into expectations aligned with, a speculative fiction, sci-fi, or horror, or mystery, or even thriller, the ending is probably not going to be satisfying for you. It definitely has more of a literary fiction ending, which again is fine. I just wanted a little bit more confirmation or for things to get a little more unhinged, dare I say. I think this style of literary fiction that sort of dabbles in other genres but doesn't quite commit frustrates me a bit. Just as a genre reader, I actually like when my books are a bit more genre bending, and I love when a book really goes for it in the end, really commits to the bit. But I do realize there are a lot of people who read literary fiction and don't read other genres and might not actually be interested in their literary fiction delving into horror or science fiction or mystery or thriller or whatnot. So obviously that's just my preference and not a universal thing. But I just like when books get a little weird. And this book was weird, and there was one scene, I would say, that got weird. I mean, there were some other scenes that were weird too, but they were maybe easier to brush under the rug. There was one particular scene that I feel like it's weird enough that there are very few answers for the weirdness that is ensuing. And I really enjoyed that scene and I wanted a little bit more. So those are my thoughts. Honestly, in the second half, again, I continued to like it. It was continued to be a quick read. I was still engaged. I was still interested in it, but less happened in the second half. I feel like the characters and their relationships didn't change significantly in the second half. We didn't really learn too much more about any of the characters in the second half. And I feel like that sounds really bad. That sounds like the second half was useless. It wasn't. I still liked it. It just sort of languished in the atmosphere and the feelings these characters were feeling and sitting in the unknown and the discomfort, and then never resolved that tension, which some people will hate and some people will love, and some people like me will feel sort of mixed feelings about. I'm still happy I read it for sure, but this is probably going to be a super short review because again, not a huge amount happened in the second half. I think that's all I'm going to say without spoilers. I will talk a bit about spoilers because the few things that did happen are definitely spoilers. So let's get into spoilers for whoever you are, honey. Starting now, don't watch these if you want to read the book and you don't want to be spoiled. Basically, like I said, from very early on, we have this murder mystery and it starts to become very clear, if not just, outright obvious, that Sebastian was involved, or just outright ordered the hit on his business partner because his business partner was trying to blow the whistle on this AI project they were doing. And connected to that, we learn more and more and more from pretty early on, but we just get more and more evidence that Lena is not a real person, that she is an AI in a very realistic body. And the book never confirms either of those things for us. We do learn what happened to Mitty's ex, and that's another place where I kind of wanted it to go a little further because Mitty basically, hi Chewy, do you want to come up here? Come on. Okay, hello. You're joining? I was kind of, from the way Mitty was talking about it, from the way everyone else was talking about it, and also the fact that the narrative kind of lingered on the idea, that her ex felt that if she was no longer able to dance, she didn't want to live anymore. So what I thought was that Mitty had done something to her that ended her dance career, which turned out to be true, and that her ex then proceeded to end it. It seems like she did not. It seems like she moved on with her life and did something else, which, if they were real people, would make me very happy. In the context of the book, I think it was a bit of an odd, it felt like the way everyone was talking about what happened made it sound way worse than it was. And it's not like it wasn't bad. She intentionally left the floor very slippery right before her ex had to do a performance on point, and she slipped and really terribly broke her leg, her ankle, bone sticking out of the skin kind of break. And that's, excruciatingly painful in general. But for a dancer, that ends your career in an instant. And she thought she might go pro, that she might join a company. So, that's ruining her life as she knows it. And it's obviously terrible to do that to someone. That being said, the book was making it out to be so much more horrific. And maybe I just read too much horror, because I was expecting it to get darker than it did get. And the implication is that at the end she goes to her ex's house and tries to talk to her, which I'm not sure. I mean, probably realistic maybe for Mitty to do that. I'm sure that's something that people do sometimes, but it doesn't feel like, that is just for Mitty. That is for Mitty to, I don't know, apologize in person, seek forgiveness. I don't know why she would think it's a good idea to re-traumatize her ex or her ex's family by showing up after all this time. Maybe just leave her alone. You've done enough, I also was a little disappointed that she and Lena didn't run away together, even if it remained platonic between them, even if it didn't develop into anything romantic. They had one single kiss, but it didn't feel particularly romantic to me. Mitty is very obviously queer. She talks sometimes about boys, especially when she was younger, or dreaming about ending up with a boy. I don't know if the implication is that she's bisexual or if that's a bit of compulsory heterosexuality going on, but Mitty is definitely sapphic. I read her as a lesbian, but she did occasionally talk about, the possibility of having had relationships with boys or crushes on boys and things. Totally possible that she's bisexual. Lena, however, she has sex with Sebastian, but again, if she is an AI, which I feel the book was heavily implying, then it seems like that might have been part of her programming, in which case she's not necessarily choosing that for herself. She seemed interested in women's bodies. She told a story about doing this retreat thing, or this workshop where all the women were naked and exposing their bits to the sun to recharge, and she was looking around at everyone's bits out of curiosity. But that read less like attraction than it did almost like a toddler or a baby's curiosity about other people's bodies, which again, if she's an AI, sort of a newborn person, that makes sense. That tracks for her development. And she does kiss Mitty, but again, it didn't really feel romantic or sexual. I think I would have liked it if Mitty continued to have feelings for her that weren't reciprocated, but that Lena loved her in her own way as a friend, and that they developed a close friendship and a bond that was platonic, and that Mitty helped Lena escape from her situation, which she kind of did. She drove her to where she thought her childhood was, either, an implanted memory or her actual childhood, and then she just walked off with the intention of continuing to go until either she ended up somewhere and could start a new life, or Sebastian shut her off. And that's all we know of Lena, and Mitty leaves her there. For me, that was pretty unsatisfying. And again, for the ending to be Lena walking off, us never knowing what happens to her, us never getting actual confirmation if she was an AI, a robot, or not. And for Mitty to go back and re-traumatize her ex for no reason, leaving Bethel behind. And the way that their last conversation went, it almost felt like Bethel thought she might not survive until Mitty came back, that she thought she was on death's door. That was quite sad to me. And then Mitty left without saying goodbye. And their last moment together was quite tender, but then leaving without even letting Bethel know where she was going rubbed me the wrong way. The more I talk about it, the more I feel like I disliked the ending more than I realized. I didn't hate it. It just, I wouldn't make any of those choices personally if these were real people and I was them, or if I was writing this book, but it doesn't make them bad. I just wanted it to be different, I guess. And like I said, we never got confirmation about who killed Sebastian's business partner. Again, it's very heavily implied that Sebastian was behind it, but we never actually get that answer. We never actually get a reveal. And maybe if it had been some sort of villain monologue where he just admitted to it, which he had a couple moments that were very close to that, but he didn't quite say it, maybe that would have felt too cliche and annoying. But I feel like we could have found out the answer another way. Maybe Lena could have found a text or an email or a weird note on a scrap piece of paper and put it together. I don't know. Something. Like the murder mystery was not a huge part of the plot, but it was brought up so early on and then referenced again all the way throughout. And then the fact that it just never was answered kind of bugged me. And then we also don't really know how Sebastian reacts to any of this. Mitty sees him on the phone. He's clearly noticed Lena's gone, but we don't get to see how he's reacting. And again, we never find out for sure. It's so heavily implied that Lena is AI, that she is the AI that Sebastian and his business partner were working on. There's the scene where she just keeps digging deeper and deeper into her leg, and she is bleeding. She has blood, but it doesn't seem to really harm her. even though it's not healing properly. And then that final scene between she and Mitty before she convinces Mitty to take her to her childhood home, she just swallows Mitty's hand and arm, which was the most batshit moment of the book. That was the moment that was the most unhinged. And I loved it because it was so weird, especially because most of the book was maybe, teetering on the edge of something a little strange and something uncanny, uncanny valley, especially with Lena, but there was never anything too obvious. Like there were weird moments, but they could have been explained by other things. Her suddenly getting up to start to vacuum apropos of nothing and seemingly not hearing or seeing anyone around her, or her having sex with Sebastian. And then when he's done and walks away, she just looks like she's rebooted and not, not conscious. The fact that Mitty's never seen her eat, there are weird things, but again, they could be explained by other things. But her being able to just continue to swallow Mitty's hand and arm with no resistance, and as if her digestive system is just a giant hole, like that her insides are just a big cavity of nothing, was very weird. And I kind of loved it. It was honestly terrifying. Like I didn't know if Lena was just going to keep swallowing her until Mitty was completely gone. I didn't know if Lena was going to bite her arm off with jaws of steel because she's some sort of animatronic robot. I don't know. It didn't go there, but I wanted more of that. I wanted more weirdness. I wanted her to, convince Mitty to help her take her own body apart, to figure it out, do, at-home brain surgery, something, or even just for them to run off together. Go off together into the sunset. And if she gets turned off, at least Mitty is there with her and could try to help somehow, find someone to reboot her. I don't know. I just kind of wanted it to, get crazier, get weirder, get more intense, maybe for Lena to kill Sebastian. That's my go-to every time I read a book remotely like this. It makes me think of Annie Bot too, where I'm just rooting for the main character to murder the guy. That's all I want. Murder them. And I won't tell you in Annie Bot whether there is a murder or not, because I don't want to spoil that for you. I'm just saying that from very early on in that book, pretty much all I wanted was for the main character to murder the main male character. And that's kind of how I felt here too. And again, it's fine. It's fine for it to end that way. It just ended and I thought, oh, that's it. Okay. And even moments like this, and if all Mitty ever saw was the way Esme looked at her, maybe what Esme was actually afraid of was Mitty. This idea that maybe all of her memories of her amazing summer with Esme, where they were both discovering each other and having a wonderful time, were not actually playing out the way she thought. And maybe Esme was uncomfortable the whole time. And maybe she did feel coerced. And maybe she was actually afraid of Mitty. And maybe there was reason to be, considering she told Mitty she didn't want to be involved with her anymore. And Mitty proceeded to cause her to injure herself in a really graphic, severe, unfixable way. And I like the idea of playing with Mitty as an unreliable narrator at that point, because all the way through the sections of her telling the past, it felt very much like it was telling it as it was. I didn't once, not that I thought that Mitty was totally reliable in all cases. Obviously, she has her own biases and perspective, but it felt like it was pretty cut and dry what happened between her and Esme, and that it was one of those moments. And then it was one of those moments of someone deciding that they, either just because she wanted to break up with Mitty or because she regretted that exploration in general, trying to turn it on her, trying to blame her, trying to say that Mitty was pursuing her and making her uncomfortable, and that she actually didn't want it, as a way to rationalize it and to distance herself from it, whether it's internalized homophobia or whatever it might be. That is a very realistic thing that unfortunately happens, and it would make sense based on the characterization, based on the story that's being told. But I liked the little introduction of who knows. Maybe there was something more menacing from the start. Maybe Mitty was more controlling or obsessive than she seemed to be. And that's why she was so quickly able to make the choice to hurt Esme in such a fundamental way. Rather than the way it was framed in the moment, which was a very sudden decision that if she'd even had one more moment to think, she would have backed out of. That she was just angry and hurt and wanted to hurt back and did something that she couldn't take back. I just think that there are a lot of themes that didn't get quite get that final button or didn't get that little bit more exploration to tie it up. Not that everything has to be tied up with a bow, but just there were a lot of things that were left so open, and I wanted a tiny bit more. The themes all the way through of embodying yourself, being embodied, being a person, what it means to be a person and to have your own life and to have your own memories. Do your memories make you a person? Can you be a person if you don't remember your own life? Free will, your body being a map of your life, things like scars and imperfections that Lena feels that she doesn't have and wants to have desperately. She wants her memories to be etched on her skin, especially because she feels so unsure of her own memories. And I just feel like a lot of those themes never quite went anywhere. And I liked them and I found them interesting. And I thought there were some quotes and some moments that were well stated. They just didn't quite get over the finish line for me. And I think this is the author's debut novel. I believe it does say author of Life of the Party. I think the author wrote like a short story collection or something prior to this. Maybe it's not a debut. Okay, right. So she's written 2 poetry collections. Yes, this is her first novel. Okay, 2 poetry collections and a screenwriter. I do wonder if, the fact that there were some, the prose, the atmosphere were lovely, the characters were interesting, the thematic content was there, the ideas were there, but maybe the execution wasn't quite as finessed, especially finishing it as I would hope. And honestly, I feel like finishing a novel is the hardest part. I've read books by seasoned authors where the ending is a little rushed or a little too convenient or a little too open-ended or a little too convoluted or whatever. Endings are hard, especially the more complex your book gets. And not only are endings hard in general, but pleasing everyone with an ending, I think, is hard. So I'm trying not to be too tough on her. I did think this book was really interesting. But yeah, there was just something missing for me wrapping all of that up. Even the fact that the title of the novel comes from a line from that old Vincent Price movie that Mitty and Bethel were watching of him building women, putting parts together, sort of Frankensteining women. And again, there are just so many hints and allusions to and references to and sometimes very overt signs that Lena is not a real person. I honestly don't think I would have minded either way. If she was revealed to have been a real person, I think that would have been interesting too. I just kind of wanted confirmation one way or the other, or for things to just get completely off the rails, ridiculous, horrifying, messed up. I don't know, for something to escalate. I just feel like there was a consistent high tension all the way through, and then the tension just was never released. And maybe that's the intentional feeling that Gatwood wanted her readers to walk away with. But I wanted a little bit of catharsis or a little bit of an explosion, some sort of something, personally, I think. Yeah. I'd be so curious if you have read this. I would love to pick your brain apropos of the ending. I feel like I'm not saying anything new now, so I will stop. But if you have read this, please share your opinions on the ending. Please let me know if you thought that it was satisfying or not, if it went the way you wanted, if you could rewrite it in any way, how would you have ended it? How did you interpret, did you interpret it the same way that I did? Or did you have a different reading? I'm curious. I think that the ending being the way it is actually would make this book kind of great for a book club or something, because there's so much unanswered to have discussions about. But just for me as a reader by myself in my house, reading in silence, I finished it and then I just kind of stared at the page, that last page, for a while, kind of hoping that if I stared hard enough, I would manifest at least one more chapter where something more would happen, but alas. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Whoever You Are, Honey. A very interesting book. I would recommend it. Again, with the caveat that the ending doesn't really wrap things up. The ending does not answer your questions. The ending is very open. The tension continues to be there all the way through. The ending doesn't release the tension. That is what the book is. And if you're okay with that, this is a very interesting book with some very compelling themes around womanhood and memory and personhood and free will and what makes us who we are. Is it our bodies? Is it our memories? Is it our minds? Is it the choices that we make? Is it our consciousness? Is it the actions we take every day? And different snapshots of womanhood, different options for womanhood, what it means to exist in a world that objectifies women and expects them to play a certain part, and how fitting or not fitting into that standard can alter your life in such fundamental ways. And female friendship and love between women and the unique ways that women can hurt each other. I think it's a really fascinating work. I really enjoyed the writing style, the prose, the atmosphere, and the tension is fantastic all the way through. But again, that's kind of also maybe a drawback because the tension stays tensioning past the final page. You never get that resolution or the resolve. So those are my thoughts on Whoever You Are, Honey. I think I am landing at 4 stars. This was definitely leaning towards a 5-star read in the first half. The second half stalled a little bit for me. I wanted a touch more from the second half. And then the ending wasn't really what I personally wanted out of it, but I didn't feel like that was enough to lower my rating more. You know, I still felt like this was a 4-star experience for me personally. So that was Whoever You Are, Honey. Queer protagonist, very interesting book. I'm glad I picked it up and I'm glad I read it. And now we're moving on to the final book I'm going to read for this video. And I did already start it. I did, actually. I finished Whoever You Are, Honey 2 days ago, 3 days ago now. I haven't been able to film for a couple days. And because I finished that one and I knew I wanted to read a 4th book for this video, I decided to pick my 4th book and start reading it. But the last book I decided to read for this video was Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift. And I picked this for a couple reasons. The first is that my research seemed pretty solidly in the camp of the protagonist is canonically queer, is bisexual, and on the page bisexual. That's what the internet said, and I was hoping they were right about that. Also, I love fantasy, and this seemed like a fun premise. Also, I love Beauty and the Beast. And while I initially didn't pick this in my 7 books in 7 days challenge because the internet said that this was not a Beauty and the Beast retelling, I have since been informed that it actually is. So another point in its favor. Also, I have been so on the cusp of reading slump in the last couple weeks, and especially in the last week. I just feel as though so many of the books I'm picking up are not gelling with me. I'm not in the mood for them. I keep picking up books and starting them and reading a couple chapters that are just, I can just tell that they are going to be so depressing, and that I read a lot of depressing books. I don't think that I'm anti-depressing book. I also think that I'm very capable of reading depressing books and frequently. However, I just do not feel in the place to read them at this very current moment in time. And a couple of the books that I had lined up that I was hoping to maybe read next, like John of John, Burn Down Master's House, both of them, I picked them up and started reading them, thinking I might choose them for this. And I just thought, I can't read this right now. I mean, I could, but my worry is, especially because I make content and I review books online for an audience, I really try not to pick up books when I can tell I'm not in the mood for them, because then I just end up liking them less than I could have. If I waited till I was in a better place and in a better mood for them, I would probably enjoy them way more, and then I could give a more positive review and, enjoy the experience more myself, but then also be able to encourage other people to read it. Whereas when I force myself to pick up books when I'm really not in the right place for them, sometimes I end up having a worse time than I might have if I just waited. And I feel like that's not really fun for anyone involved. And I decided I'm going to save those books for a little bit later. Hopefully it won't be too long till I feel ready for them, but I just felt like if I picked them up now, I would have a bad time, and then I wouldn't be able to, not that I wouldn't be able to review them fairly, but just, sometimes you're just not in the right place for a book, and then it's not fun for anyone. So I decided reading something maybe a little more lighthearted, maybe a little bit more fun. Obviously, this has some more dark ideas. There's grief being explored. There is some sort of terrifying beast that is massacring people that they want to go out and kill. Obviously, it's not all butterflies and rainbows, but the tone is more comedic. It's a little bit more light in its delivery. And at least my sense of it is that it's going to have at least not a totally devastating, super depressing ending. Hopefully. Also, I don't know how many alsos I'm on now. The final thing is that I had forgotten, but then I remembered that the audiobook of this is narrated by Moira Quirk, probably my favorite voice actor / audiobook narrator ever. I love her voice so much. She makes me happy. She does the Locked Tomb series audiobooks, and she has amazing chops when it comes to voice acting. And I kind of wanted to hang out with her in my ear holes. That sounds weird. You know what I mean. For all those reasons, I decided to pick up Kill the Beast, and I have read half of it. So I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have theories that I will share in a spoiler section. But starting with the things that I can say without spoilers, I definitely am getting Beauty and the Beast vibes a little bit already with our protagonist, who is a 5'10", very strong, built, muscly, warrior type mercenary being paid to go kill these various beasts. Lady protagonist, who also is bisexual, Lysa, feels like she's our Gaston, but Gaston as the hero of the story. Which is fun. And Aardvark is our Belle, our beautiful bookish boy. And, she's out to kill the beast, as Gaston was. And this is a fantasy world with fairies and, more of the folklore style fairies who are nefarious in a world adjacent to our own. And they have been creating these hounds and these beasts that are terrorizing human beings, mostly seemingly as revenge for humans encroaching on their land and destroying the environment and ruining the balance of nature. And Lysa lost her brother to an attack. And since that point, when she was quite young, she has dedicated her life to taking out beasts and hounds, trying to protect people from them, and also hoping to eventually get her revenge to kill the specific beast who killed her brother. Hence the title and the premise. And she has met this very fancy man, Aardvark, who says that he has seen the beast and he wants to hire her to kill the beast, and has one of the beast's claws and knows where it is and can lead her to it. And they are an unlikely pairing going out on this adventure, and they have to collect all these specific items with emotional resonance for the two of them to build the ultimate weapon that can actually kill the beast. And as they're going around finding these specific elements that they need, water that has attachment to one of them, iron or earth or etc., they're getting to know each other, they're opening up to each other, we're learning more about them, and they're very much sort of flipping the traditional archetypes on their head, where Lysa, our protagonist, is not a lady. She is the strong one, she is the resilient one, she is the sort of gruff, emotionally restrained one, while Aardvark is more frivolous in her mind. He likes fun fashion. He likes wearing frills and bright colors and tight pants, and he knows how to sew and he knows how to cook, and he doesn't want to kill or hurt anyone, and not things that actually define people of any gender and are totally open to any gender to enjoy or to do, and are more personality types, but definitely things that feel more associated with the strict gender roles. But especially for fantasy of this type, and also for anything remotely romantic fantasy or romantasy, their types are very much flipped. It reminds me of the dynamic in The Everlasting with the characterization, but maybe even more extreme. I like both of the characters a lot. I think they're fun. The writing is pretty entertaining. It's a very easy read. It's a very quick read, but there are some sort of, there are jokes written in, there are punchlines. I enjoy the emotional core of it, that it is about, for Lysa anyway, the loss of a sibling and that grief, and her having so much sadness and so much anger that she can't let go of, that she's trying to find a way to make it make sense and to try to make the world okay again, even though she can never get her brother back. And that would really be what she would need to make the world feel okay again. She is doing what she thinks is the next best thing, which is killing the thing that took her brother away. And there is a lot of intense emotion and sadness and grief and despair for both of them just under the surface. And I think that's being written quite well. The ways that it's just peeking out occasionally or bursting out in high tension moments and then being shoved back down again. I think the ways that they're opening up to each other are sweet and interesting to watch. I like Brandy the dog, although I do think it's odd that Swift continues to refer to the dog as the bull mastiff over and over again. It just seems odd. I've had dogs in my life. I grew up with dogs. I wouldn't have referred to them by their breed. I had a border terrier, and then I had a Shiba Inu. I never said the Shiba Inu followed me along. It's just weird to me. I don't get it. I mean, it makes sense to tell us at least once what kind of dog it is, if that matters. That's fine. Maybe a couple times, I guess. But it's just, I feel like Brandy is referred to as the bull mastiff more than by name or by dog. And that's odd to me. That's just a nitpick. I just think it's strange. The story's pretty fast paced. It's moving along quickly. It's not that long of a book, but it's also a quick, easy, entertaining read. Again, if it has a more lighthearted tone, it doesn't feel like it's going to totally devastate me and rip my entire heart to shreds, but it has the potential to, because of that emotional core underneath. I feel as though there are ways where this book could actually do that to me if it so chose. And I like playing fast and loose with my emotions, while still feeling that the book generally is a little bit more lighthearted and fun and not quite so devastating and dreary. Liza is queer in some way, shape, or form. She definitely likes women. She has an ex who is a woman who we meet on the page after they were broken up. And it seems like maybe the book is hinting that she and Aardvark could maybe fall for each other. Who knows? Right now, they're just begrudgingly maybe becoming friendly acquaintances, but things could escalate. Who knows? But she is definitely queer. So check mark for that for representation for this video. I do think I have a theory, and I've had a theory from very early on about the Beast, and I think I'm right. I'll share it in a spoiler section. If I am right, I think it is too easy. Not that every book has to, books don't have to be a big mystery where you can't see it coming and then there's a twist or something. It's fine to actually indicate that something is the way it is, and then for that to be revealed over time. It's fine to actually give the reader clues and for them to not be wrapped up in 14,000 red herrings. I don't think that tricking a reader is the only way to write a good book. I do think it was a little too obvious, a little too early, if I am correct, and that is making it a little less fun. I think if it had been a bit more ambiguous, a little bit more on the fence, am I right or am I reading too much into it? I think that would have been a little bit more fun, at least for a few more chapters, at least for a little bit longer, and then make it obvious. Because I think it's meant, we as the reader are meant to intuit some things about the Beast before the characters realize it, and that's fine. A lot of books utilize that as a tool in the storytelling, and I think it's actually something I typically really enjoy, is figuring something out before the characters do, but I know a lot of people don't enjoy that, at least early on. Oh, hello, Chewy. You've come back. Hi. So what else? The banter is fun. The world is interesting. It's not there's not excessive world building. The magic and the world are introduced as needed when needed, but it's not the most complex, layered world building or magic systems I've ever heard of. There's some lore there, there's some history there, but it's not as extensive as some other fantasy, but I wouldn't describe this as epic or high fantasy. It's more, I don't know if it's cozy fantasy, but it has sort of that level of world building, which is totally sufficient for me for the most part, if that's the kind of book I'm reading. I think the characterization is good. I think the narration is fantastic, next level incredible. The writing is totally passable. It's not gorgeous writing by any means, but it's meant to be pretty fast-paced, colloquial, engaging, immersive, straightforward, and it does that. There have been a couple quotes that I have really enjoyed, like, deliberately causing harm is always about power, about control, but it's an illusion. Let your anger consume you, and it's only a matter of time before you lose yourself to it completely. But being able to control your emotions, having the foresight to understand the consequences of your actions, and choosing a less destructive path is one of the gifts of being human. Rejecting that in favor of mindless rage makes you no better than those mermaids or the Beast. But I'm having fun with this one. I'm glad I picked it up. I think as long as the second half continues in roughly the same direction the first half has been going in, I will have a fun time with it. So I'm going to get into spoilers because I want to talk about my theory. So let's do that. Spoilers for the first half of Kill the Beast starting now. You can skip them using the chapters down below if you so choose. But my theory about the Beast is, again, I feel pretty obvious from pretty much the moment we meet Aardvark, which is that Aardvark is the Beast. Not only because his name starts with an A, just like Prince Adam, the Beast turned man. That's just incidental. No, pretty much from the beginning, everything, every aside, every facial expression that is highlighted that he has, every little comment he makes about every servant at his manor being dead, because they died from old age, because he's been alive for centuries. Constant mentions of how people's lives are so short. Everyone leaves, everyone dies. Objects last longer than people. His fashion is made up of stuff from hundreds of years ago, all, different decades and eras all mixed up together. He used to be a knight and do jousting, which is super, out of date. And he has burns because he was in his childhood home as his father tried to burn it with the Beast inside. And at first he only mentioned that the Beast was inside and then later revealed that he was also inside at the time because he was the Beast. I just think, there are so many times where she says, well, yeah, I promised I'd kill the Beast, so I will. And then she notices his facial expression and she doesn't understand it because it's both relieved and sad. It's like, yeah, because he's the Beast. He feels like he's a danger to people. He doesn't want to hurt people, and yet he can't help himself when he's in Beast form. He has mentioned that he has attempted to end his existence and has been incapable of doing so. He seems to be immortal, and he has hurt people, including his own sibling, and he has killed people, and he doesn't want to do so, and he thinks it would be better for everyone if he were gone, and so he wants her to kill the beast, aka kill him. Which is, again, why I feel like this book could easily turn into total emotional devastation. I do think that this book being successful or not, especially because it feels like it's so obvious from very, very early on that Alderic is the beast. You know, I think the cover design also really gives it away. Alderic is described as so pale and having white hair, and then the beast is this white beast, even though the beast is described as being this terrifying, evil, menacing creature, and then it's designed as this super friendly white lion looking beast. I almost wish, I do really like the cover design. Whoever designed it is a talented artist, but I do think having a cover where it was sort of a beast in shadow, sort of in the murk, in the woods, just sort of eyes and teeth visible, would have the menacing effect while also not giving it away based on looks as well. But even without that, I think it's very easy to tell from early on that Alderic is the beast. Even things like the mermaids being way more scared of him than of Liza, because they sense that he is this otherworldly creature. You know, there are just a lot of signs. His metabolism being super fast, his wounds healing really quickly, all that. So I think that letting us figure that out really early on can work if it leads to the climax and it's executed well of Liza and Alderic having a connection, whether it's platonic or romantic, I don't really care, but just caring about each other and reaching that point, and then her learning the truth about him and how that plays out and how she handles the betrayal, the realization that he is the one who killed her brother, and then also reckoning with, depending on how and when that information is shared, the fact that it seems to me that Alderic maybe doesn't have full control over himself while in beast form, and so maybe he wasn't fully, or maybe he doesn't have a choice. Maybe it's part of the sort of maybe it's part of the magic. Maybe he's in, under a curse or something. But regardless, her having to reckon with the fact that she's finally opened up to another person more than she has in a long time, and she cares about him only to realize that he is the one who murdered her brother, and the only way to get closure for her brother, or what she has held on to for all this time, is killing the beast. But now if she kills the beast, she's killing her friend. She's killing someone she cares about. And maybe we'll, come to have compassion for the beast and for what Alderic is going through. And I think if Sarah Swift does a good job with those realizations and those emotions and the betrayal and the pain and the conflict and the push and pull of different loyalties and wants and needs, I think that this could be emotionally devastating or also just very satisfying in terms of the character development and the relationships. I don't know yet how that's going to go. I think if all of that is done well with a lot of emotional honesty in the way the characters act and react, I won't really mind that it was obvious from early on. And again, I think it's meant to be that way. And I think whether people like it or not is going to be very much personal preference of whether you want to be able to solve it and you want it to be a little bit more challenging, or if you're fine with the book just kind of telling you from early on what's going on. I'm a little worried that the book might be too short and might be going a little too fast for that moment to hit as hard and be as emotionally devastating as I kind of hope it could be. They might be connecting just a little bit too quickly, but maybe not. Maybe not. I'm surprised that she is not more suspicious of that and she's not starting to put it together, but it does seem like their worldview or their understanding of these beasts or these hounds is that they are not people. I don't think that they know that it's possible for a beast to be an elf or a fairy and the beast, and that it's sort of almost a Shrek Fiona situation where she becomes an ogre at night, or during certain phases of the moon during the equinox. I think Alderic said it's 4 times a year. But that would be interesting, especially because there is the information about there being this cult of people who are trying to protect the hounds, the beasts, fairies, and that Liza's ex learned some sort of truth that was compelling enough for her to leave, this role she was filling that Liza took over for, where she was going out and killing these beasts, to actually protect them instead, and started this organization to protect them. And she was given this information and then put under a spell, essentially, where she can't reveal it to anyone. And my guess, because she was really trying to convince Liza to come with her and to also pledge to hear the secret, but she would have to do it without knowing what the secret was because her ex was under a curse or under a spell. And Liza basically told her to fuck off, which, I mean, understandable based on the circumstances and what she knows. But my guess is that the reality is that all of these beasts or hounds are actually elves who are under a curse. And every time that they kill one of them, they're killing a person who is, yes, hurting people, but hurting them because they've been put under this curse. And maybe there's another way to save them and undo the curse other than just killing them, you know, and that they're also suffering. So that is my theory for that. And I think Aardvark is the obvious sign of that. But I also think that there might be many more examples of that. And that might be the case for all of these hounds. I don't know why they would want to hide that so much. I mean, maybe they think that people would want to kill them extra if they knew that truth, but it seems like they wouldn't based on the world building and the understanding that a lot of people, a lot of the regular humans actually have a lot of sympathy for the creatures from the other world, it seems. Yeah, those are my theories. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Aardvark is the beast. And then my other theory that's maybe less confirmed is that the truth that her ex learned that made her want to start this organization to protect them is that all of these hounds, at the very least, I think the way it's framed is that there are all these different types of creatures and trolls and things, but that the hounds are like this next level, really violent, really dangerous creature that are incredibly hard to kill. And my theory is that those hounds, at the very least, are all individual fairies or elves that have been cursed. I'm having fun with it. I think if it is able to pull off the emotional side of it for me as a character-driven reader, I really want the emotional payoff to be there. I think if those scenes are well written, and I see potential because like I said, I think that the characterization is really good. And I think that the writing of them being, you know, having their surface level, their personalities and what they're actually saying and how they're actually acting on the surface, and then all of the pain and suffering and grief and anger bubbling up underneath, and you can see the distortions on the surface, but it's not quite breaking through, or we get little moments of it breaking through. I think that is being very effectively done. So I hope that the actual explosion, when the reveal happens, is satisfying and well written. I have faith. I'm hopeful, but I'm excited to see where it goes. Also, the fact that on the back it says revenge makes monsters of us all. I mean, very on the nose. Very, very on the nose. So yeah, those are my spoiler thoughts. I'm going to go finish this. I don't think it'll take me very long. Only have 150 pages left. So I think I will likely finish it tonight. Maybe in the morning. It is pretty late. It is midnight. So maybe in the morning if I decide to be a responsible adult and go to sleep at a reasonable time. But it's only 150 pages. I could smash that. Anyway, I'm going to go finish this. I'll be back tomorrow either way to give you my final thoughts. And then I will rank all 4 books from this video just for fun. I finished Kill the Beast, and you know what? This might not be a perfect book, but I feel like this was the perfect book for me at this very moment in time. You know when that happens? I really needed something a little bit more lighthearted, a little more hopeful, something heartwarming, something engaging and exciting, but also on the lighter, slightly leaning more towards maybe the cozier side, the cozier side of things. And I just feel that this was all of those things that I needed, and I really enjoyed my time with it. I really liked this book. I loved the characters. I loved Lysa. I loved Alderic. I loved Nadia and Rags. I loved Brandy, even if I wanted Sarah Swift with all of my being to stop calling Brandy the Bull Mastiff over and over and over again. That is probably my biggest critique of this entire book. I wish I had an ebook so I could search how many times Bull Mastiff was used, because it was just so excessive. Quite ridiculous. But Brandy was adorable, and I was glad that Brandy was there, even if I didn't need to be reminded what breed of dog he was every other page. The characters were great. The characters were the heart of this, and I think there is that sort of more found family, finding the place where you belong, unlikely friendships growing, and people figuring out that they can in fact be loved for exactly who they are, and that they can find a place where they are valued and cared for. And I think that those are often mainstays of the growing cozy fantasy genre, and I think that's why this felt so cozy to me, even though some of the themes and some of the actual content of the book is quite dark. The fact that they are hunting down a beast that has murdered many people, including children, not the most lighthearted subject matter ever. There is a lot here to do with grief and loss and anger and revenge, and also pretty extreme sadness and despair and self-loathing and suicidality. And none of those things are particularly cozy ideas, but I do think there is a sense throughout the entire book of hope, a bit of humor and a bit of lightheartedness and a bit of almost just I don't mean this in a pejorative way, and I feel like some people could take it in a way that I don't intend it, but almost like there's a safety net for the reader to say, yes, some of these ideas are dark, and yes, these characters have been through the ringer and they're not okay, but it will be okay, and they will be okay. And you as the reader are being held and supported through this story to know that it's not going to be a totally rip your heart out, most devastating ending of all time where you just walk away completely destroyed and can't even pick up a book for 3 months and can barely function because the book has just torn your heart and soul out. It's not that kind of a book. And I just think that's what I needed right now. And it was fun. It was a quick read. It was an easy read. It was an entertaining read. The pacing is quite fast. The characters are fun. They are very distinctive from the first time you meet them, so you can very quickly get to know them. They all have very distinctive personalities. It makes it easier to learn their voices. It makes the dynamic very clear from early on, but you do get character growth and development, and the relationships slowly build. And I really loved the slow development of a very unlikely friendship here. And there's also, I'll also add that there isn't really a romance. This was definitely written in such a way that there might be a sequel, there could be a sequel. And I personally would love if Sarah Swift wrote a sequel. I would love to read more with these characters. I really grew very fond of them. And so who knows where that might develop in the future. But in this book, as it is, I would say there is no romance. And I kind of loved that because I felt it was being set up for it to be a romance. And I loved that instead it was a story about friendship. I mean, I love romance. I love love. It's great. I read many books with romance, and that's amazing and fine and wonderful. But I loved that this was a book about two characters who really needed a friend who saw them for who they were and loved them for who they were, and that they could find that in each other. It was very heartwarming. And it's the kind of thing where I feel like, when you're a kid, if you're reading middle grade books, so many books are about finding a friend who just sees you for who you really are and loves you for who you are in that way, and finding deep, true platonic love with a friend. But I feel as though once you get into adult fiction, I mean, those stories still exist, but they're definitely not as abundant as romantic love stories. And there was just something really, really nice about characters who, again, who knows? If there's eventually a sequel, maybe these characters will have a romantic relationship. I would have no issue with that whatsoever. But I loved that this story was about a friendship, really, at the core of things. And about healing, about two characters who are lonely and have isolated themselves because they feel that it is too painful, it is too risky to be vulnerable and to open themselves up and to care about people, and that they sort of, against their will, start to care about each other. And both of them kind of don't want that and are resisting it with every fiber of their being, but they just can't help it. They're just meant to be friends. And again, I loved that. I needed that, I think. I really resonated with the way that this book talked about grief and loss and sort of not being able to let go. It's less so about the immediate moment of grief, the immediate aftermath, or a fresh grief, but about a long-standing grief, an older grief that you are not letting turn into a scar. It's the scab that you keep picking off and, it keeps bleeding again. You keep creating a fresh wound because it feels like it's more scary. It feels more dangerous. It feels more wrong somehow to let the wound actually heal and become a scar and maybe fade a little bit with time. And so instead, these characters are living in their despair, in their sadness, in their anger, and holding on to that for dear life because it is too scary to let go and to risk forgetting. I'm going to get emotional, but I could just really resonate with that. I could really resonate with that. And it's hard. And I think the thing is, and what these characters learn and the reality of grief is that even if you do allow yourself to let go a bit and you allow yourself to let go of the anger and you let yourself find joy and find love and be open and vulnerable again, even if it means you might lose again, that allows you to live your life to its fullest. That allows you to live a life that the person you lost would want for you. And it doesn't mean that you forget the person. It just means that maybe you think of them and you think of the happy memories. You think of the things you shared. You think about something you would really love to share, a joke you'd love to tell them, or something you'd love to give them. And instead of holding on to the anger, the unfairness of it, or the sadness or the guilt. And it's a maybe less dramatic stage of grief to be focused on, but it's really... I really resonated with it. I thought it was really beautiful. I loved getting to see how different characters were processing their grief and reckoning with a loss and the ways that they were trying to cope in maybe not the healthiest ways. And I think so much about this book, even the little blurb on the back, "Revenge makes monsters of us all," is so much about not letting a need for revenge turn you into what you're fighting against. Basically, which is something that I feel like I've talked about so many times about so many books. And I think it's an idea that comes up a lot in literature, but how do you fight against evil? How do you find justice? How do you get revenge without becoming the evil that you are trying to fight? And I think that's something, especially for Liza, that she is not even aware of being an issue until she meets Alderic and he has a different perspective and he sees her more objectively, and through her association with him and seeing how he has handled loss and grief very differently, she maybe starts to see herself differently and to realize that maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another path she could take. And I also really loved that this book felt very much interested in the nuance. It felt so often that it was trying to push back against black and white, very straightforward definitions of what makes a monster, what makes a villain, and what makes a hero, what roles we play, and whether they are so clean cut or if there is a lot more nuance and complexity to that situation. And, there being room for forgiveness and healing, even in situations where it feels like there's no way that forgiveness could be found. And I loved that this book did that in multiple areas. It wasn't just in the sort of main conflict in that primary storyline where you might expect to have a story about forgiveness and healing. There is also a side plot that explores this idea in a different way. And I just loved that this book is not interested in saying that you have to forget what someone did or the ways that someone hurt you to forgive them, but you can forgive them for both of your benefit and you can build a new relationship with them while still remembering what they did. You don't have to forget. And you don't have to pretend it didn't hurt you or it didn't matter, but you can still forgive. And maybe that is actually to your benefit and better for everyone involved, and that healing is worth it, even if you can't forget, you know? I know the saying is forgive and forget, but I think that maybe the more healthy attitude is remember, you know, it's important not to forget what people have done and to remember their behavior and to keep it in mind. But forgiveness is not just for the person who is seeking it. You know, it's also for the person giving it. I really felt that Sarah Swift did a great job with the emotional payoff of this. The climax was really well handled, I thought, in terms of the character development and the dialogue and the emotion. That was something that I was concerned about, like I mentioned, because there are many clues from very early on to some of the more mysterious elements of the story. And I did guess, not exactly, I didn't get it completely right, my theory, but an element, probably the most important element of my theory, was correct. And what I said, I can't remember if I said this in the spoiler section or in the non-spoiler section in the last update, but what I said was that I thought that it would still land well for me and that I wouldn't mind guessing things earlier on if the emotional payoff was there, and I felt it was there. It was there for me, personally. I felt very emotional in those scenes. I felt that despite the fact that the pacing is quite quick and this isn't that long of a book, I felt that enough time was spent on those scenes and on sort of the growth and change and the transition. I'm trying so hard to be cagey because I don't want to spoil anything, but I felt enough time was given to it, enough weight was given to it, and the characters were given a reasonable amount of page time to process everything. And I was just very satisfied by how that was handled. Personally, I think everything else I want to say has to be a spoiler, so I will do a spoiler section to talk about the reveal and my theory and what was right and what was wrong and how I felt about the ending and so on. But yeah, I just really liked this. I really, really liked it. I really connected to the characters. I really liked how emotionally vulnerable it felt. And I loved that it felt a little more lighthearted and hopeful than many of the books I read on a regular basis. And some of the books I've read recently, it really felt like a breath of fresh air for me. And again, just kind of came at the right time. So I'm very glad I picked this one up. And it was very queer, even though it doesn't have any romance on the page. Our protagonist is on the page bisexual. She has had relationships with men and women, and her ex, who we meet repeatedly on page, is a woman. And Aardvark also has a past with men and women. He mentions having loved multiple women and at least one man, and that was great. So those are my non-spoiler thoughts. Hopefully I covered everything. I think I did. Like I said, I'm going to do a spoiler section, and then I will rank all 4 books that I read for this video somehow. It's going to be hard. I already know. It's fine. Okay, spoilers for Kill the Beast starting now. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Okay, so basically, I'm assuming if you're watching this that you have read this and you know what I'm talking about. So my theory that Aardvark was a fairy, an elf, and also the beast was half right, or mostly right, in that he is the beast, which, I mean, duh, right? It's very obvious from early on. And I don't think it's meant to not be obvious. It seems pretty clear that the author expects you to know from very early on that it's him. And the tension comes from Liza not knowing and her figuring it out once she already cares for him, which is what was my theory. And again, I think the emotional payoff of her realizing it and feeling so betrayed, but she's already realized that she loved him before this point, that devastation was so well done. The betrayal, the anger, and then how conflicted she is because she is so angry. She's angry at him for lying. She's angry, still angry, and wants revenge on the beast. She blames him for her brother's death and all the other deaths. But then she also knows Aardvark so well now. She loves him. She cares about him so much, and she can't square that circle. She can't make sense of it. And I loved her still being committed to killing the beast regardless, even as she struggled with it. And then when she finally gets to the moment and Aardvark transforms in front of her, she just can't do it because she realizes that she doesn't actually blame him. Now that she knows his story, now that she knows what his experience was like, now that she has seen who he is and the kind of person he is and how hard he worked to try not to hurt anyone and how devastated he was and how much he wanted to and how hard he tried to not hurt anyone, to the point of trying to end his own life as multiple times, trying to hire people to kill him so that he would no longer be a danger to anyone else. And for her also in that fight scene, as she hesitates to kill Aardvark as the beast and the beast runs away and she's chasing him, she realizes that he is in a blind rage and he can't think straight. He isn't himself anymore. And she sees herself in him. And that is the moment that really flips a switch for her. The final switch of Aardvark saw me in this state and he loved me anyway. He saw me at my worst. He saw me blind with rage, risking my own life to kill someone that hurt someone I loved. And he still loved me and he still cared about me. And I'm seeing him like that now, and how could I turn away from him? Especially because this isn't even something he's consciously aware of, unlike when Liza was doing it. You know, she was blind with rage, but it was still her. She wasn't under a curse. He can't even remember what he does when he's the beast, and he never asked for this, and he never deserved this. And I just felt that that whole sequence was so well done, and the fact that it was spread out over several chapters of her learning that information and being angry and processing it, and then having a few conversations about it and learning more about his history and creating the sword and struggling to hold on to the anger she needed to make the sword, but still feeling committed. Just, it was so satisfying to me. And I loved the final confrontation and her final confession of love for him, basically in the moment that she felt he was about to kill her, and that she just wanted him to know that she loved him, and she hoped he wouldn't blame himself for killing her, and that is what broke the curse. And it just got to me. It made me very emotional. And for them to come back and Nadia, the, gloomy teen, to be so excited to see both of them and for them to be building a life together. And then in that final chapter to realize that she's working towards some sort of reconciliation and building a new relationship with her father. And again, that idea of not needing to forget what her dad did to her and her brother and the role he played in what happened and in her brother's death, not having to forget that Aardvark was responsible for her brother's death, but understanding the reasons behind it and being able to forgive enough to build something new and to not throw away the whole person because of a mistake they made, even a mistake that feels huge and insurmountable at one point, and realizing that she actually does care about them and she does love them, and it's beneficial to both of them to try to heal over that and to try to build something, even if it doesn't look the same, especially for her and her father. If it doesn't look the same as what their relationship used to be, it's never going to be as simple, but it can be something worthwhile, something meaningful for them. And I just thought that was really, really beautifully done. I loved her realizing that she had become so obsessed with revenge because it was easier to hold on to anger and to be angry at the beast than it was to fully reckon with the devastation of the loss of her brother, and that fear that if she let go of the anger and the revenge, that she would be letting go of her brother, and that she felt she couldn't do that. And I loved her realizing that she could still honor her brother and remember him and love him and care about him without holding on to revenge, and that she didn't actually have to kill the beast to do right by her brother. And I mean, she did kind of kill the beast because she broke the curse, so the beast no longer exists, but she didn't have to kill the man behind the beast. I also was not expecting, but loved the reveal that all of the hounds are human beings who were turned into these monsters because they were cursed by fairies. And love is maybe the wrong word because it was, of course, very sad, but for Liza to realize that she's been killing all of these hounds, thinking that she's killing these horrible mythical monsters who are only exist to hurt human beings, to realize that each one of them was a person who was cursed, and maybe many of them not from any real fault of their own, like Aardvark, or maybe they made a small mistake that was nowhere near worth the kind of curse that they were forced to live with, and to have to reckon with the fact that she has killed many humans who were cursed, and is she really any better than the beast or any of the hounds, and reckoning with that. I thought that was a really great reveal. I loved the reveal that Rags was half elf and that Nadia was a hound herself. I didn't see those coming, but I really enjoyed those little moments. And it was fun because obviously the big reveal or the big twist is meant to be that Aardvark is the beast. But obviously the narrative is set up in such a way that you know that from early on. So it's not really a surprise. So I loved that there were a couple other surprises thrown in to keep it sort of exciting at the end and to still have some reveals, even if the main reveal you would expect actually wasn't much of a reveal because we learned it early on. And like I said in the non-spoiler section, I really love that Aardvark, and I mean, maybe someone else would read this and read it as entirely romantic, but I don't think they like do an awkward side hug. I think they hold hands a couple times. I don't think they ever kiss. You know, it didn't feel very romantic between Aardvark and Liza. And maybe, again, if there was a sequel and it really did feel like it was maybe setting up for one, which again, I'm on board for, I could see it developing into something romantic and that would be fine with me. But it really felt like true platonic love, a very deep, caring friendship kind of love. And I thought that was really beautiful. You know, the power of platonic love, the power of friendship, saving lives. And it feels cheesy, but it's beautiful. And like, what is life for if not for finding those people who fill your cup and loving them with everything that you can and accepting them for who they are, seeing all of their messiest, worst bits and choosing to love them anyway, even when it sucks sometimes, because everyone has those darker bits and everyone makes mistakes and everyone can be a monster or a villain in someone else's story, but we choose to love our found family for exactly who they are. Okay, I'm starting to wax poetic. You get it. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very beautiful, and I loved the setup that they are going to now sort of pivot and try to see if they can find a way to hunt down all of these hounds and break their curses instead of killing them. And I hope that the author writes a sequel. I would really enjoy continuing to follow them. But I think those are all my thoughts on Kill the Beast. This was definitely a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I can't believe the internet, I don't know why the lead is buried so much. I don't think there's any reference to it being a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I don't think it's mentioned on the internet in any official capacity. I mean, maybe there are legal reasons why they would want to avoid that. I don't know. I mean, it's not a one-to-one comparison, obviously, but there's a lot of Beauty and the Beast elements to this, I would say, especially with Aardvark's backstory. There are quite a few similarities. And I love Beauty and the Beast, so I don't mind that whatsoever. But those are my thoughts. Those are my spoiler thoughts on Kill the Beast and just all my thoughts in general. I really needed this. I found it really heartwarming. Again, it's not the most incredible book I've ever read. It's not a masterpiece or something. Okay, let's not get hyperbolic here, but it was a really beautiful story. It touched me. It made me cry. It was very heartwarming and hopeful, and it was exactly what I needed. And I had a lot of fun reading it. And also Moira Quirk is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite narrator of all time. And she was incredible. And if you read this, please do a tandem read with the audiobook or just listen to the audiobook because her voice acting is the best. So I loved this. If you couldn't already tell, I'm giving Kill the Beast 5 stars. Would highly recommend. Really, really loved. So, ending this video on a high note, and now I'm going to rank all the books I read for this video, which is not going to be particularly fun, I don't think. So, we have Kill the Beast, we have Whoever You Are, Honey, The Girl with a Thousand Faces, Spoiled Milk. I have 2 5-star reads and 2 4-star reads. So Spoiled Milk and Kill the Beast were both 5 stars for me. And then Whoever You Are, Honey and The Girl with a Thousand Faces were both 4 stars. Of the 2 of these, I think I preferred The Girl with a Thousand Faces by a small margin, but definitely a little bit. So I think this is my ranking of the 4-star reads. And then I think, yeah, again, loved both of these, gave them both 5 stars, but I think this is going to have to be my ranking. So I think this is it. Kill the Beast is my favorite, then Spoiled Milk, then The Girl with a Thousand Faces, and then Whoever You Are, Honey. But again, very close. 2 5-star reads, 2 4-star reads. And honestly, I think in both of these cases, with just a tiny tweak, with things being slightly shifted for my own just personal preferences, if they were a little bit more perfectly suited to me, both of these were very close to getting 5 stars already. So this was honestly an incredibly successful reading vlog for me. I really enjoyed all 4 of these. 4 Aardvark books down, 4 books that I can move off my TBR shelf onto my finished shelf, and pretty successful in terms of queer rep. Again, there are so many books that I had to choose from, and so many of those books I really hope I will get to very soon. But again, I felt myself getting into a reading slump. I felt myself being in a bit of a not amazing place mentally, and I really needed to pick something fun and hopeful as my final read for this video. So I'm very glad that I picked Kill the Beast because that was just exactly what I needed. But let me know any of the other books that I mentioned in this video. And I also actually received my June box as I was filming this. So I have 2 2 more queer books from Aardvark now on my shelves, which are these two, Whidbey and Girl's Girl. I also got Sublimation, but I believe that one doesn't have queer rep, at least as far as I know. But that is the end of this video. Let me know if you've read any of these 4 books. Please share your thoughts down below. I would love to chat more about them. If you're sharing spoilers, please start your comment with spoilers for X book and then hit enter a few times so that the spoilers are hidden by the read more so that no one else gets spoiled. And also, if you've read any of the other books that I thought about picking for this reading vlog and ended up not choosing this time around, let me know what you thought of them. Would you recommend? Should I pick them up sooner rather than later? But I had a lot of fun with this. Hopefully you did too. Like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already. Also, to let me know you're a real one and watch this whole video, leave an emoji or multiple emojis if you so choose, representing one of these 4 books down below, and I'll try to guess which book your emojis represent. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends. Happy Pride.